person can be unlucky, but surely not twice in a row. Before being crushed into pulp by a truck for the second time, I had always believed that. Smashed into hero shards by a truck in my original world, I had only scrambled up in another, confirmed my handsome face in the storefront's glass, when a second truck launched me into the sky. As I soared, I heard the driver muttering about finishing 2 orders, one transmigrator and one for a survival game, wondering whether the 2 souls were interdimensional counterparts. Counterparts my foot, I cursed inwardly, since my mouth could no longer form a word. When I came to, I was standing in soft pale yellow light facing a glowing orb that looked suspiciously like a ripoff. I asked the orb not to tell me this was the God space. It dumped basic information into my head instead. This really was an infinite level clearing game, but the worlds I would visit involved no high-end nonsense like clashing supremes or an obliterated heavenly Tao. The truck driver had spilled the answer, the wish corridor, the survival game space. There were 2 ways in. The common way, replying to a random message with a wish and clearing worlds proportional to that wish's difficulty. The second way, mine, was people who died violent deaths dragged in by accident with no wish. For us, the only exit was clearing 10 worlds, after which we returned home with our earnings and were resurrected. I breathed out in relief. 10 worlds sounded easier than a single resurrection comeback match, especially since the corridor only used worlds where survival was the main challenge, and I was a longtime gamer. The orb explained each mission had at least 2 participants, no upper limit, strictly player versus environment, which suited me fine. I wanted to read more, but the orb was flashing furiously, urging me to transmigrate. 3 translucent hexagonal badges materialized: talent, skill, and wonder. The newbie benefit: 1 category a random bronze tier draw. Talent innate, skill acquired, wonder a special item, each tiered bronze, silver, gold, and legendary. I considered. Bronze talents and skills stayed within human limits, and the skill pool was so vast it could dump me Introduction to Elementary Mathematics. So I picked Wonder, since a bronze wonder still carried some miraculous ability. I tapped it. Cyan motes converged into a finger-sized metal whistle, a dog-calling whistle, bronze tier, summoning 2 Alaskan Malamutes for 1 hour, smart enough to follow most commands, once per day, midnight refresh. My eyes lit up. 2 Malamutes was a serious draw, the only worries being the short duration and warm climate intolerance. The orb's flashing was so blinding now I gave up reading and transmigrated. No sensation, just a blur. Then the temperature plunged. The pale yellow became a pitch-black cave, the entrance ahead opening onto a vast white expanse, and my eyes narrowed in cautious satisfaction. The winter setting suited my wonder perfectly. A panel surfaced, black text on white, snowflakes drifting along the border, a 3-dimensional model of me on the left, my name above, an hourglass below, counting down 99 days, 23 hours, 58 minutes. A full 100 days I pinched the bridge of my nose. The right side skipped basic attributes, listing age and height before 2 slots of hexagonal badges. The first slot held 3, 2 bronze and 1 translucent. Instant reaction, bronze talent, neural reflex at the top of the human range, capable of bursting several times stronger in crisis. Invisible affinity, bronze talent, pairing a handsome appearance with a gentle temperament that lowered others' guard. The third badge read unawakened. The skill slot held only 1 bronze, survival expert but a gamer, granting a tiny amount of survival knowledge mostly pulled from games, with the parenthetical 0 out of 5, which felt mocking. A movement behind me made me whirl around. A dark figure shifted in the dim cave, and I remembered every transmigration involved at least 2 people, so this had to be my companion. Player versus player combat was discouraged anyway. The cave was too dim. I made out only a short dress with a sweater tied around the waist and hair in a side ponytail. The outfit gave me pause, since anyone with half a brain would have prepared clothes and food. Yet she carried nothing, and a glance down confirmed I was still in my spring casuals. Either she was like me, dragged in by accidental death, or supplies could not cross, or she had not believed the corridor was real. She noticed me and let out a surprised cry, asking aloud whether the isekai email had actually been real, complaining she had thought it was a prank, muttering yabai and adding that it was super cold. Her voice was crisp and sweet, and although she seemed to be speaking Japanese, I understood her without trouble. Social anxiety hit me like I had been possessed by Bachi-chan. From her tone, she had to be a young girl, and pairing up made survival sense. She stepped out of the shadows, rubbing her arms, and the faint light from the cave mouth finally let me see her clearly. I froze. The girl wore the short dress and sweater I had imagined. Medium-length blonde hair and a side ponytail, sapphire eyes, a face that mixed cuteness with fragility. This was Hayasaka Ai from Kaguya-sama, no question, and I was dumbfounded the corridor would drop a 2-dimensional beauty in my lap. As my third 2-dimensional wife, I knew her well. Kaguya Shinomiya's personal maid, daughter of a high-ranking Shinomiya member, 1/4 Irish, shockingly versatile from humanities to sciences to combat, regularly top 3 in popularity polls. She noticed my stare, and her eyes narrowed. I could practically hear her thinking I might recognize her as another Shuchin student. She had been about to give her usual alias, Smithy A. Harasaka, but committed to her real name to keep team dynamics intact. I caught myself, nodded, introduced myself as Russell, and extended my hand. Then, considering the freezing cave, I started to pull back, assuming she might not want contact. Hayasaka Ai's shoulders relaxed at the gesture, probably reading me as the safe introvert type, and she grabbed my hand and shook it firmly before I could withdraw. Maintaining her gyro persona, she giggled that Russell was a cool name and told me to call her Hayasaka. I noticed her fingertips were cold and suggested we find her something warm. As I turned, I caught my foot and almost fell, catching myself on the wall. She jumped to steady me, called me Russell-kun, and asked if I was all right, then spotted 2 small hiking backpacks back to back, partially filled. She crouched and asked if they were mine, remarking with what I knew was an act that she had packed snacks, drinks, and cosmetics, but brought nothing in, complaining cutely. I told her they were not mine. While opening one, I noted her phrasing had quietly confirmed something useful. Bringing in supplies in advance did not work. 2 identical packs, each holding thermal underwear, a thin jacket and trousers, 2 packs of biscuits, 2 bottles of water, a small box of matches, sized for different people. I told her it had to be a newbie gift pack, and she tilted her head and asked innocently what that meant, which made me sigh inwardly since a girl who could build a computer at whim could not be ignorant of such a basic concept. I let her keep her act. I explained the benefit, since the corridor wanted us to live rather than die at once, and told her to put on the clothes immediately, or she would be a popsicle within 2 minutes outside. She answered Ugu, agreed, and warned me not to peek. Her dressing speed was more than twice mine, and by the time I had finished my thermal underwear, she had already tucked her skirt into her pants and pulled on her sweater. I shouldered my pack and headed for the cave entrance, with her skipping after me, agreeing the cave would be unlivable by night. She handed me the decision on where to go next, asking whether we should find better shelter, clearly already having her own plan, and waiting to see if mine was reasonable. I stroked my chin and explained that since these worlds were based on survival games, the first priority was identifying which game. At the cave entrance, I smiled and told her our luck was holding. This was the Long Dark, a game I had played. She blinked and shook her head decisively, the honest one this time, since although she built computers and kept up with mobile games to fit in with the gyro click, a slow computer game requiring hours of sitting was unaffordable for a maid spending her days with the eldest young lady. I gave her a quick rundown. The game was set in winter in Maple Leaf Country on Great Bear Island, residents long gone, leaving abandoned houses and factories. 2 modes, survival with only the player and story with non-player characters. And I privately hoped for survival, since armed humans and shadows were far worse than wild animals. She stared at the white expanse and complained that hearing winter in Maple Leaf Country alone made her feel cold, then asked where to. I pointed ahead. She cupped her hands like a telescope, squinted, and guessed it was a log cabin. I nodded, relieved, and told her we had landed on Mysterious Lake, the newbie map I knew best, and the building ahead was its landmark, Trapper's home. The silhouette alone told me exactly where we were. We started moving, her stomping her feet in her little leather shoes. Walking ahead, I fed her information. Wildlife had multiplied with humans gone, common animals being deer, wolves, rabbits, and Cappadocia owns gamecock, with bears and moose rarer and more dangerous. Cougars existed, but came later, so I left them out. She bit her lip, exhaled a white breath, and asked worriedly if there were really bears. No act this time, since she knew close quarters combat against a bear was suicide. I told her bear spawn points were relatively fixed in the game and I vaguely remembered them, so avoiding them in advance should work probably. She giggled and said Russell-kun really was reliable, quickening her pace. We crossed a hilltop where snow sank to the calf, cold seeping in instantly. I had been a northerner, and even I had rarely seen snow this extreme. Glancing sideways, Hayasaka Ai smiled back at once, but her face was several shades paler than in the cave. I gave up on gathering kindling, since any delay risked collapse. At the top, the view opened, revealing a clearing with a dilapidated wooden shed on the right beside a withered tree, the shed running into a circular valley where gray snow rabbits foraged. To the left stood Trapper's home, intact, perched like a lonely tower. I told her this was the place, a good start with shelter, a stove, maybe a hunting rifle. She shivered but kept her energy up, poked my arm and called me Mr. Guide, urging us on. As we moved, I scanned warily. A sharp glint crossed her face before she asked lightly what I was watching for. Danger? Wolves, maybe. I whispered there was a bear den nearby in my memory, that bears spawned at intervals, and moose could too. She wrinkled her nose and quickened her pace. Passing the valley, she stole a few glances at the rabbits, remarking happily they were a food source, then admitting catching them barehanded was beyond us. I put on a look of relief and told her good thing she was not the kind who saw a rabbit meat. She replied bunnies were very cute, but her tummy was more important, in her squeakiest voice. Our luck held, no bears or moose, and we reached the cabin. I pushed the wooden handle, hinges groaning, and my heart settled when the door opened. Just like the game, unlocked, no glass to break. Inside hid a scent of dust, old wood and aged animal fat, and we frowned but shut the door at once. Heavy enough to block the air, the cabin was still icy compared to a heated room, but body heat began to climb. The light through blurred windows let us take in the small interior at a glance. A square stove with a basket beside it holding firewood, and 2 pieces of coal, a single bed thick with dust and cobwebs, a sheet metal table at its foot, a wooden shelf with 2 tin cans and miscellany, and a narrow metal locker near the door. I told her fire first, since the chill kept slipping through my clothes. I took out the matches and went to the fireplace, Hayasaka trailing along to help. Fire starting was not difficult, since I had lived in the countryside until I was 10. I checked the stove for blockage, grabbed a roll of newspaper from a broken shelf, crumpled balls at the bottom, arranged twigs in a circle, stacked heavier firewood on top with gaps for airflow, struck a match. The newspaper went up at once, the sticks baked and caught. My old skill had not gone rusty. In the game, plenty of skills topped at level 5, and my fire starting could pass for 3 or 4. Hayasaka praised me sincerely, telling me Russell-kun was amazing, that although she could attend, hack, and bodyguard, fire starting was not on her list. I rubbed my nose and gave a proud chuckle. Once the firewood blackened and warmth touched my palms, I shivered, the bone-deep cold registering in my feet and calves. Our thin pants had offered no protection in the snow. From the knees down, we were soaked in ice water. I told her we had to strip the ice layer or our body temperature would keep dropping. She had already been wringing her pant legs and was relieved I had thought of it myself. She kicked off her shoes, peeled off her soaked socks, pointed her feet toward the stove, blushed, and told me Russell-kun was really smart but reminded me not to peek. I covered my mouth, coughed, and turned my head because I had peeked just now, but I would not look again. She wrung her pant legs as much as possible and rolled them up. With no spare pants yet, I imitated her, then stood, telling her to warm herself while I checked the room. Resource gathering was the heart of any survival game. The long dark being chosen first suggested low difficulty, with no magic or high-tech in a setting of a deserted modern town. Compared to games where you collected materials from nothing and drilled wood for fire, one where you found canned food, firearms, and warm clothing was easy. My search produced a decent haul. The priority was clothes, 2 thick shirts, 2 pairs of thermal pants in thin and thick, and a heavy mid-length parka, a high-tier item. Split between us, we could move outside and the spare thermal pants meant we could hang our soaked ones to dry. There were no shoes, so Hayasaka still had to wear her little leather shoes. After changing, she sat on rags before the stove, rubbed her insteps with her cheek on her knee, and sighed that her poor feet had never faced such a trial, then put the smile back on and reminded herself not to complain. Finding so many warm clothes was already good. I blinked. She really did make a man want to cry. Even knowing she was likely in performance mode, she was so damn considerate that I felt moved. I told her shoes were common in this world and we would find some elsewhere, so for now we should take stock of food. She agreed brightly and pushed herself up. The visible items were already piled together. She picked up a tin can and read it. Pork and beans, deciding it sounded good. I told her 3 cans total, 2 pork and beans and 1 peaches, and laid out the small snacks, a bag of beef jerky and 2 oat bars and 2 cans of soda. She tapped her chin and remembered our packs each held 2 packs of biscuits and 2 bottles of water, then counted on her fingers. Even with conservation, only 4 or 5 meals. Adding with a pout that her small appetite meant eating less was fine, I countered it would not last 5 meals, since calories burned fast in snow, so probably 3 meals. She clapped and said Russell-kun had a point, providing emotional value as usual. I suggested we figure food out slowly and make something to eat, and she nodded and offered to cook. That was for the best, since my own culinary skills were erratic, capable of rivaling the Tatsuki Elite 10 on a good day and producing dark cuisine on a bad one. I looked for cookware, since most enterable houses with a fire source had a chance to spawn it. She beat me to it, pointing to the gap between the stove and the wall. I found a cast iron skillet wedged in, pitch black and heavy. I praised her in my heart. She had not just been warming herself, she had been observing. The pan was dusted brown-gray, no old grease, a wipe down would do. Since our shoes were still wet, I took the pan outside to wash with snow. She stood up to tighten the top buttons of my parka, called after me not to go far or to come back if I felt cold, which turned my face red and forced me to look at the ceiling while she laughed. Watching me leave, her smile faded into a calm, indifferent expression, and she muttered that the wish corridor really was real, that she had encountered something incredible, that if she could rely on this magical power she might truly help Lady Kaguya, then told herself to focus on surviving this world. She decided she had been fortunate to meet a decent-looking teammate, well-informed, gentle, humble, not aggressive, and most importantly capable of thought. She flexed her warmed feet, stood barefoot since her shoes were still wet, and began scavenging corners of the room I had missed. Unaware of the good person card I had received, I stepped out, wrapped my parka tighter, and breathed long. On a sunny, windless day, the temperature was not as unbearable as I had feared, only my feet truly cold through the sneakers. I spotted a woodshed diagonally across, which in the game had a high chance of fuel. Inside I sighed in mild disappointment. Only 2 pieces of firewood in the corner. Still, large firewood burned long, so I tucked them under my arms and climbed back. I filled the pan with snow, wiped it with a rag, and the pan came clean. I pushed the door open and Hayasaka Ai called me back to warm myself. I shut the door with my foot, unloaded the firewood, and she beamed that I had found fuel too, shaking the wooden crate beside the stove and telling me we would sleep well tonight. She declared the pot clean and ready, took it, rolled up her sleeves, and inspected our food pile. I noticed the workbench with surprise. In the game, this metal workbench opened a crafting menu, and now it was covered with odds and ends. Hayasaka Ai noticed where I was looking and smiled that she could not let Russell-kun do everything alone, so while I was out, she had scavenged the rest. Beyond food and clothing, the main haul was medical. A small bottle of painkillers, a roll of bandages, a half-full bottle of disinfectant, plus the matches and a stack of newspapers. The highlights came next. Items tucked in corners. First, a hunting knife with a leather sheath, pole blade gleaming when drawn. I would give it to her, since with her skills a sharp tool would be wings to a tiger. Beside the knife lay 2 golden rifle cartridges. I snapped my head up at the empty gun rack, kicked myself for forgetting, then looked for the safe that usually sat between the table and the cabinet. Missing. A regular hunter's cabin apparently was not qualified to have a safe in reality, which was reasonable but disappointing. She asked curiously whether I had said firearms might be here. I confirmed rifles and revolvers, and that this house theoretically had a chance to spawn a rifle, but our luck was clearly off. I could not help looking regretful. She picked up the can of pork and beans and gave a mischievous smile, telling me our luck was great actually since she had met someone as reliable as Russell-kun. Alright, stop flirting, I thought. So Chunum would have been completely dazed, and I forced myself back into focus before the air filled with a pink filter. I noticed her brow was slightly furrowed and asked if she had a headache. She propped her face on one hand and said with some difficulty that she had been calculating our food situation. We had walked far, would sleep in a not very warm room, could not eat too little, but eating too much risked leaving us nothing later. I had been thinking the same while washing the pot. Trapper's home was decent, but long-term survival required hunting, and we could not yet, so my plan was to move tomorrow. She played along and asked where. I told her the camp office, one of the best spots on this map and arguably in the whole game. 2-story with better insulation, easier food, wild plants. Cappadocia owns gamecock and rabbits, and ice fishing huts on the nearby lake. Her eyes lit up and she asked if we left tomorrow. I said yes. Rest tonight, eat our fill tomorrow morning, set out. She was visibly relieved we only had to worry about dinner and breakfast. Then asked the distance, the route, the terrain, tapped her drying leather shoes worrying about rough ground and footwear like that, and whether wolves lurked. I scratched my head. Mysterious Lake was one of my best maps. From the cabin we would head right with our backs to it, cross a snowy field to find an abandoned railroad, and follow the tracks to the camp office. Distance was the issue, since the game's protagonist could reach it in half a day, but he was a tough guy who survived a month on venison steaks with the occasional rose hip, gorging on protein with no carbs or fats, hauling 30 kilograms through a blizzard for hours. And we probably could not compare. Even Hayasaka Ai broke character for a split second, her little face drooping as she muttered the game's design was unrealistic, then reasoned that half a day meant walking and resting in stages should still get us there before nightfall. I added that wolves could spawn on the big slope before the railroad and near the camp office. Compared to physical drain, a few wolves were not a big deal. Setting aside my wonder, her manga-level combat could stab a few wolves with a sharp branch, and I could probably take down 1 or 2 with a stick once adrenaline kicked in. Strictly one-on-one though, since against a pack even she would not have much advantage. She put on a slightly frightened act calling wolves scary, but her eyes stayed calm. I realized this was a good chance to break the ice. We had chatted plenty, but had not discussed substance. Neither of us knew the other's reward. In pure player versus environment play, sharing information made cooperation easier. I trusted her intelligence enough to assume she had already thought of this and was waiting to see what I would do, so I took the initiative. As a familiar 2-dimensional character, I let my guard down a bit. I pulled the whistle from my collar and waved it. I told her this wonder could summon 2 Alaskan dogs lasting an hour. That 2 hunting dogs plus 2 people would discourage an average pack. She exclaimed I could summon doggies, called it amazing, and very cooperatively pulled a wooden box from her pack. The box was jujubread lacquer, faint patterns of intertwined clovers and cherry blossoms blurred in the firelight. She admitted her luck was not like mine. She had also picked a wonder, but hers could only brew black tea. She slid the lid open. On deep blue velvet lay a mini silver teapot with a Celtic Triskelion pattern, 2 small silver teacups, 2 small silver spoons, 2 folded linen tea towels with delicate lace. She spread her hands and introduced it in her Doraemon impression as an emergency teapot set that generated black tea daily that slightly boosted spirits. Relieved fatigue, tasted good, though the daily yield was only 300 milliliters, just 1 cup each. She turned her face away looking faintly embarrassed, but I did not mind, staring at the teapot and nodding. A hot drink, providing heat, boosting spirits, briefly raising core temperature, increasing blood flow, combating fatigue. A small but infinitely generated amount, basically infinite water if I round it up. Even a bronze wonder truly had miraculous effects. I cast a subtle glance at her pack. When we had first opened the gift pack, there had been no wonder inside. So while changing, she had been quick-witted enough to slip the wooden box in. Her movements really were agile. I complimented her, telling her this was useful. She placed the teapot on the side table and giggled. I should look forward to enjoying some tea, adding that since I could summon doggies, she felt much more relieved. She held the can of pork and seemed to consider how to open it, but I took it and started prying with the hunting knife. Since I was more practiced, having learned about MREs through my survival interest, while she, as Kaguya Shinomiya's maid, had never really eaten from cans. She asked whether the camp office tomorrow would have enough food. I answered decisively, plentiful, at least twice this cabin, enough for several days. She wanted to know to calculate today's portion. She made a glasses-adjusting gesture and said earnestly in her pinched, cute voice, not to underestimate her, since maintaining the balance of her figure, her nutrition knowledge might be professional. She was probably not lying about a balanced figure, but Hayasaka Ai was leaving out half the truth. The figure she was actually maintaining was Lady Kaguya's. In the original story, Kaguya's diet was strictly controlled, since any weight gain would have her brothers complaining about improper etiquette. With that in mind, she might genuinely be a professional. I told her I would leave it to her, calling her expert after I pried the can open without losing too much content and handed it to her. She returned a two-fingered salute and carried the can and pot to the fire, then asked me to open the peaches as well. I grunted and continued my can opening duties. Her cooking really was good. Instead of heating the can directly, she poured the contents into the pot. The broth hissed as it touched the preheated bottom. She adjusted the position, stirred with a clean-shaved branch. Lentils and ground pork bubbled. Lard melted, sauce thickened. Aroma filled the air. She took out the biscuits. The newbie backpack came from the corridor rather than the game, so these were not the saltines I remembered, but small foil-wrapped squares, baked dehydrated biscuits meant to be soaked. She broke them through the foil with a wooden stick into medium pieces, poured them in, pressed gently into the broth, used residual heat at the fire's edge for 2 or 3 minutes, then picked up the pot. She placed it on the table, stood with one hand on her hip, twirled the wooden stick, and suggested the name Braised Meat and Bean Biscuit Stew. As her hype man, I told her it was a very fitting name. With no utensils, she tapped her forehead and brought over the 2 small spoons from her wonder, essentially teaspoons with a fingernail-sized bowl, decent for a bite. She fished the peach slices onto the biscuit foil, leaving the syrup in the can. I watched, since with her intelligence she would not throw out syrup without purpose. She giggled it was a mysterious wonder tool for tomorrow that could not be contaminated, then pressed down the jagged edges and set the can aside. After pouring tea into 2 cups, she sat, pressed her hands together, said itadakimasu, and scooped from the pot, telling me she had not shown her full skills, but it was barely edible. I was hungry but did not rush. I took a sip of tea first. Rich maltose aroma, full body yet sweet and smooth, a natural fragrance lingering. I blinked. Since she had Irish blood and the teapot bore Irish symbols, the tea should have tasted like English breakfast, yet this was clearly a Chinese black tea. I made a private note to stop questioning wonder logic. I complimented the tea and reached for the braised biscuits. Canned food sold for long shelf life had to be at least edible, and heated it was better, lard mingling with lentils and spices into something fairly delicious. Salty savor, biscuits still slightly firm at the core. I gave a thumbs up. Hayasaka Ai's contribution was not large, but since she so often gave emotional value, I reciprocated. She beamed and stuffed another spoonful. We ate in silence. Once she had suppressed hunger, she picked up her tea, sipped, and looked at me. She had a question. The feeling I was very familiar with this wish corridor, adapting fast while she was different and still did not feel this was real. While cooking, with the aroma drifting up, she had wondered whether she was dreaming and the smell was actually her family cooking at home. She was now fishing for information. I deliberated, and an idea formed. I told her this was the first I had heard of the Wish Corridor, but I had read similar novels, usually about people pulled into a space to complete tasks. She raised her eyebrows and asked for more. I spent 5 minutes explaining Infinite Flow novels in storyteller style. She remarked, sighing while clutching her spoon, that going on adventures across horror movies and endless dangerous scenarios made the Wish Corridor feel like a pretty good place by comparison, since it had given us a wilderness survival game, rather than a ghost movie. And starting rewards. I felt the atmosphere was right, and noted that the most classic difference was that in Infinite Flow spaces, panels usually display basic attributes, while ours only showed talents and skills. Quick-witted, she understood instantly. She thought Russell Kuhn had deliberately led the conversation to exchange information. Judged I was not prying maliciously but trying to align our abilities and adjust the plan. Since I had revealed my wonder first, it was her turn. She opened her panel. On the left, just like mine, 3-dimensional model, name, countdown. The talent and skill columns differed in quality. She also had 1 unawakened talent and 2 bronze talents. Hardened heart, bronze. A resilient heart capable of withstanding immense pressure and remaining calm. Unless subjected to a massive amount at once, she would never be defeated, but there was a soft side within, seemingly longing for romantic feelings. Celtic mist, bronze. A hazy calling from her Irish blood, sharpening her perception of nature and others' emotions, enhancing spirituality. Skills. A single silver tier, Qualities of a multifaceted maid, years of extreme training giving her excellent fitness, familiarity with most combat techniques and proficiency in some, top-tier observation, information processing, maid skills, and role-playing. She decided some touching up was required. Share but not word for word. She told me, since I had mentioned panels, that we should exchange. She gave Celtic Mist word for word, and Hardened Heart only the first part, hiding the romance bit since it would be embarrassing. As for the skill, she modified more heavily. Qualities of a multifaceted maid would have flagged her as far more than a few days into the job, so she renamed it Bronze Skill Genius Gymnast, inventing a gymnastics club stint. Effects, she cut observation and information processing, said only a flexible decent physique and a few basic combat techniques. Twirling her hair, she feigned confusion and asked, since she had practiced rhythmic gymnastics with clubs and hoops, why those would count as combat techniques. If she could have, she would have erased combat techniques and only mentioned fitness. The problem was my talents and skills had no combat capability, since instant reaction gave only a slightly higher survival chance with no offensive power. This forced her to boost herself a bit, otherwise a wolf or two she could handle would have me insisting on long detours wasting stamina. Who knew how the corridor judged? I shrugged, thinking privately she was hiding something, but I did not care much. Just then my spoon clinked into hers. She apologized quickly and glanced into the pot, the canned mush almost gone. She pulled over the foil and invited me to try the peaches. She asked with a subtle glance whether we should rest once full. A beautiful girl saying that triggered a brief fantasy, but the ice outside and the 100 days forced me calm. I told her we should rest, then glanced at the firewood pile and added we should take turns. Maintaining house temperature required someone to feed the fire, and a few hours of freezing meant a cold and serious trouble. She agreed Russell Kuhn had a point, finished the last of her tea, her thin cherry blossom pink lips glistening with oils, and asked how to arrange it, suggesting I rest first. I waved my hand and told her she should rest first. Not just chivalry, I was weighing my own situation. Since as a veteran shut-in, I could routinely stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning, but waking mid-sleep was something I genuinely could not handle. She did not push back, tightened her coat, and said she would listen. In truth, she was very satisfied with the arrangement, since her situation was the opposite. As Kaguya Shinomiya's attendant, she had to wake earlier than Kaguya every morning, and getting up at 4 was routine, so the second half of the night suited her. I took the frying pan, scraped clean but with a thin coating of sauce, outside to wash with snow. She tidied the dusty cobweb-covered bed so we would not be choked at night. Outside the sky had grown dim, and since neither of us had a clock, we could only judge by light. Admiring the orange-red afterglow, I was interrupted by a wolf howl, then another. My heart skipped, but I forced myself calm. Since standing next to the cabin, even a bear could not touch me. The howls were still far off, slightly ethereal. I muttered tomorrow we might have to deal with these wolves, shook the snow water out of the pan, packed it with fresh snow, and headed back. Back inside, Hayasaka Ai was kneeling on the bed with her back to me, and when she heard the door, she turned and raised both hands with a flourish, holding 2 slightly flat dark plastic bottles a bit larger than a palm. Small lamp oil bottles from the game, good stuff for hurricane lamps or torches, now probably also usable as lubricant. I asked where, and she pointed at the bed, complaining she did not know how these people stored things, leaving lamp oil where lucky it had not leaked. I placed them on the workbench. She straightened her clothes, took off her heavy outer coat and pants down to her thermal layer, lifted the dusty covers and crawled in. She pointed at her parka piled on the sofa by the stove and told me to put it on during watch, since even with a fire the room was not warm, and reminded me very firmly to wake her at shift change and not stay up all night. Her round, wide blue eyes warned me again that staying up would delay our journey. She sweetly said goodnight and closed her eyes. I placed the frying pan on the stove, since letting the fire burn for nothing was wasteful. In the game, using a fire for 2 or 3 purposes was basic player operation. Filling a cast iron pot with snow to melt and boil into drinking water, sleeping while it warmed and boiled. 3 birds. In reality, boiling while sleeping was tricky, but boiling while keeping watch was fine. I adjusted the pan, then sat on the single sofa and draped the parka over myself from the front. Feet on the edge of the stove. Warm. Water boiling, fire warming. All-nighter ahead. After sitting idly a few minutes, intense boredom set in. 3 to 5 hours had always been easy at home with movies or games, but here with nothing it felt far too long. Feeling I would fall asleep, I patted my cheeks. Hayasaka had mentioned an unawakened talent too, probably standard issue, a unique personal talent like a light of the soul. The effects of such talents were usually very good, so I should awaken mine. I opened my panel, and to my surprise, the translucent badge representing it had clearly changed. This badge was different from the others, not hexagonal, but circular, divided equally into several parts. 4 sectors plus a small blank circle in the middle. 5 areas total. 3 sectors were already filled with color: azure, emerald green, pinkish purple. I focused and clicked, but there was no reaction. Still unawakened. If I guessed correctly, filling the remaining sector in the center should awaken it. As I thought, my gaze focused on the blue area and a scene surfaced. me discussing the camp office with Hayasaka Ai and planning our itinerary. A recap. The emerald green sector showed us having dinner. The pinkish purple was not a single clip, but a montage. All scenes of Hayasaka Ai flattering me in soft, gentle voice. Blue planning, green food, pink charm. With only 3 clips, I could not be certain, only inferring. There was no more to deduce, so I withdrew and picked up the newspaper. I had originally thought this place would be like classic infinite stream novels where newspapers carried wealth of background or key information. For example, a supply storage center somewhere in Great Bear Island would have changed my plans entirely. Unfortunately, no key information, just boring local news, someone winning a winter fishing competition, or a bear delaying its hibernation in the forest. At least it passed the time. It was not until the pan started gurgling that I looked up. I placed it on the table to cool and sat back down. Hayasaka Ai, who had been squinting, closed her eyes again. Sleeping in a place like this, she could not sleep soundly, and even suspected she had only dozed in a half-awake state rather than actually fallen asleep, but enough to ensure energy for the journey. In the middle of the night, I added firewood twice. After dozing again, she checked the time using the survival countdown, which I had not thought of. Estimating she had lain down for over 3, nearly 4 hours, she decided to get up. She rolled, and the friction of clothes on bedding reached my ears. I put down the newspaper. Her face looked red under the firelight, and she waved with slightly sleepy eyes, telling me she was awake. I had not thought of using the countdown and said hesitantly, I did not know how long, but it should not have been too long, suggesting she rest more. She shook her head, said she had rested enough. I did not refuse since I was sleepy. I stood up in the parka while she rolled off the bed. Foggy from sleep and boring repetitive newspapers, I took off the parka and under her surprised gaze, draped it over her and tightened it. She blinked, a bit dazed, since my earlier behavior had not been so bold, and suddenly intimate actions hours later puzzled her. Fortunately, she observed calmly, soon noticed I was bleary-eyed, smiled, grabbed my wrist, pulled me toward the bed, told me I looked about to fall asleep standing up. Jolted by her voice, I realized what I had done. Scratched my cheek, sat down, took off my shoes, crawled in. As expected of an anime beauty, even after hours of snow and being smoked by the fire, the aged fat smell of the bed had basically disappeared, replaced by a faint lemon fragrance. Smelling it made me more awake. Hayasaka Ai had the same impression of the parka, a faint cedar fragrance, and just putting on the coat made a vision flash of me embracing her from behind. She shook her head vigorously and pinched her cheek. Although she liked shoujo manga and had longing for romance written into hardened heart, she was not boy crazy to this extent, was she? She had nearly pulled the coat collar up to sniff. Russell could not possibly have succubus blood, she thought, although she did not know it was simply my invisible affinity taking effect. As soon as she sat on the sofa, she felt the difference from her usual routine. Being so busy after waking that her feet barely touched the ground was different from sitting just to kill time. She quickly found occupation, mentally planning the itinerary. Seeing I was sleeping soundly, she took the tablecloth, measured, and began cutting with the hunting knife. I was the type who could sleep through thunder, and I slept several hours until the howling wind woke me. My eyes focused on the stove ahead, flames tumbling, and the thought flashed, oh right, I had transmigrated. Hayasaka Ai was no longer on the sofa. She was leaning against the only window. The glass was covered in stains hard to remove, light transmission very poor. The house long empty or the previous owner not fond of cleaning. She rested her hands on the sill, squinting out. I propped myself up and asked what was wrong. She turned in mild surprise to see me awake and explained she had heard a very exaggerated wind and come to look, but the glass was too dirty to see clearly. I rolled off the bed. Leaving the quilt made my body shiver, since even with a fire the cabin did not compare to a heated brick house. Near the window the howling was more apparent. She told me in a low voice the wind was crazy and she had not dared go out. I told her not to worry, the wind might stop soon, since the weather system in the long dark was volatile and could switch between deadly blizzard and clear sky in only a few breaths. She pouted, hoping it stopped soon since otherwise our plan would be ruined. She remembered something and pulled me to the table covered with items. She picked up strips of cloth that looked like bandages and explained they were leg wraps, since our shoes were thin and we would not last walking through snow without help. Then held up plastic shopping bags she had found and said we would bind the wraps first. Then plastic bags, then socks and shoes, to keep our feet from getting wet. She pointed at 2 other items I recognized as the tablecloth and curtains, modified with a head hole and tightened sides. Since we did not have enough warm coats, she had made these. I asked if these were her version of poncho cloaks. A poncho was a traditional garment of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, though I knew them mainly from cowboy movies, and the most basic style matched hers, a square cloth with a head hole. More advanced versions had pockets and decoration. I looked at her with mild surprise, since though I had known she was likely skilled in combat and decent at cooking, tailoring was new. She giggled she had been in the handicrafts club at school, a convincing explanation true or not, since either way I now had 2 new pieces of clothing. The wind did not last long. After a short while it noticeably died down. We decided to eat then set out. Today's breakfast was more sumptuous than dinner since we had hours of snow ahead. The usual canned pork and beans and hard biscuits, plus Hayasaka Ai took out beef jerky, tore the bag and poured it onto the biscuit foil. The leftover peach syrup she mixed with today's black tea into sweet tea, since sugar would smooth the journey. While she prepared breakfast, I felt our pants, soaked yesterday but now dry from a night of roasting. I packed our backpacks, taking nearly everything from Trapper's home, putting the bulk on myself to keep her pack light. Not just looking after her. In case of a wolf pack, she would be the main damage dealer. In a lighter pack, let her perform. Before sleeping, I had wondered whether to bring the fuel we had found, since it was heavy. Looking now, there was no need to hesitate, since after a fire all night, the firewood from outside and the fuel in the house were basically all burned up. I frowned. I had been considering clothes, food, and weapons, but fuel was also top priority. Her voice interrupted to tell me breakfast was ready. There was not much to say about breakfast. Classic canned pork and beans with biscuits. The beef jerky, since I came from a northern province known for it, I rated not bad. Ingredients average, but enough spices that at this point even a toasted shoe sole would taste good. We planned the route in more detail. Walking the whole way in one go was unrealistic, so I thought about a rest stop halfway, and she added that the 2 oat bars left were perfect for the road. After eating, I poked my head out. Slight breeze, but no snow. Pleasant. The snow's whiteness stung my eyes and reminded me of another matter. I gathered small finger-thick sticks, piled them by the table, and explained casually that I had remembered a wilderness survival show on ice and snow. One section on emergency snowshoes. Take flexible sticks, tie a tennis racket-shaped frame, strap to feet to distribute weight. Useless on thin snow, but very helpful where a step sank past your shins. She watched me gesture a few times, and when I could not seem to tie them, burst out laughing and told me with a giggle that Russell-kun might know a lot, but my manual skills were poor, and Miss Hayasaka would handle it. She tied them with leftover fabric strips from the leggings and cloaks. In just over 10 minutes, she had 2 pairs of emergency snowshoes. Not beautiful, but sturdy. I scratched my head, helpless. My combat could not match hers, and now my crafting could not either. I really had become the intelligence character. What I did not notice was that the skill survival player flickered, a small line of text popping up telling me a crafting blueprint had been detected, and since it was non-game, it would not be recorded. I also found 2 strips of dark curtain fabric. I held one to my eyes and handed her the other. I told her walking in snow long could cause snow blindness because of the vast white, and until we found goggles, these strips would do. The snowshoes were from a show, but snow blindness was common knowledge since where I came from we wore goggles or sunglasses every winter. We spent over 10 minutes organizing clothing. I gave the parka to her, same logic as the lighter pack, since if a fight broke out, we relied entirely on her. For myself, I put on the tablecloth cloak. We checked packs and walked out. Cold air rushed into my lungs, but not freezing. I felt quite warm, at least for an hour or two, no hypothermia. She took a deep breath, raised her hands in a cheer, called it great weather, smile bright but eyes cautious as she surveyed the surroundings. I told her with a smile that the wind earlier meant we still needed to move quickly. She gave a forehead salute, her face turning serious as Private Hayasaka Ai announced she was following orders, her left foot in the snowshoe taking the first step. I moved too, walking ahead and observing carefully. The path I had chosen was safer, following the mountain wall down to the tracks, then the tracks to the camp office, both stretches with clear landmarks. I watched for wolves and natural resources. Heavy giant branches I ignored since the protagonist had to chop those with an axe. Small items could be picked up. She crouched beside me and asked whether the red things were wild berries and edible. I was at a low shrub with no leaves, about 20 or 30 finger-sized red fruits. I told her rose hips, sour but good for vitamin C, and that canned food alone would not do. Today we had no time for pine needles for needle tea. She said it was lucky to have me, then muttered that sour berries supplementing vitamins were similar to hawthorns, and maybe she could try them in cooking, or even make jam. I looked forward to the jam and picked up speed. We gathered 40 to 50 berries, a handful's worth. She joked in a quirky voice they were precious vitamins, clapped and stood. I was a bit regretful since I had not found other valuable plants. The long dark had many, old man's beard lichen for disinfecting wounds, birch bark for restoring health and tea. Another effect would not be lacking either, reishi mushroom. In the game, reishi were like common mushrooms, several near a stump, easy to harvest. Then again, were reishi not just a type of mushroom? We crossed slopes and a sparse forest. As we tired, a slope appeared ahead, not steep but high. 1 or 2 semi-open train cars at the top filled with logs. Tracks meant we had only to climb and follow. Our joy was tempered. 2 small black shadows on the slope. I pulled down the dark fabric, squinted, and whispered, wolves. These 2 were the antonym of robust, thin and skeletal, not intimidating. My heart settled. She grabbed my arm, voice stammering that there really were wolves. I told her not to worry, they had not noticed us, patted her hand, and reached for the whistle. The dog-calling whistle could only be used once a day. With only 2 wolves, we might handle it without a precious use, in case of a stronger pack later. Besides, direct confrontation was avoidable. From our angle, the 2 wolves were further down and to the left, and sticking to the right mountain wall. Given the game's animal perception, We would not be detected at this distance. Once we circled to the other side of the tracks, they would notice us even less. I whispered the plan to her. She agreed, since the wolves were weak, but wilderness survival required ensuring safety. She trusted Russell Kuhn's judgment, clenched her small fist to cheer me on, then suggested preparing for a fight as well. Before climbing, I found 2 sticks nearby, about 2 fingers thick and 1.5 meters long. The hunting knife was sharp, but too short, and even without much fighting experience, I knew an inch longer was an inch stronger. The stick felt a bit light at that thickness, but I could not find anything more suitable. I tucked the sticks under my arms, led her near the wall, and we climbed. Because of the snowshoes, we walked fast and quietly, and the wolves were completely unaware. I could now be certain these animals' perception was the same as the game. Compared to reality, game animals were practically deaf and blind, which would make avoiding hostile ones and hunting rabbits and deer much easier. She whispered she had not expected them to really be unable to see us, and asked, since she had not played many games, whether people complained when animals were this stupid. I replied that if she thought realism was poor, she could play the Hunter Call of the Wild, where animal perception was real. She said she would pray the next world was not the hunter, since she preferred stupid, dull animals. As we reached the top, her eyes widened. Just as I had said, a long track stretched out. I immediately looked around for supplies. Only 2 stacks of newspapers and a can of soda. I stuffed them in, then looked at the dozen giant logs piled in the freight car. If I could haul these to the camp office for fuel, how long would they burn? I could only envy, since without a sled, it was out of the question. I looked back to see her squatting and untying her snowshoes, telling me the snow near the tracks looked thin. I took mine off too. We shared an oatmeal bar, drank a can of soda each, and found a spot to relieve ourselves. Standing by the rail car, arms crossed, gazing at the icy landscape with the sound of rushing water around me. A piece of trivia crossed my mind. Those who survive in freezing environments should know holding in urine consumes heat and lowers body temperature, so one must relieve themselves regularly, even without urge. Faint footsteps sounded behind me. She clutched the hem of her cloak, face redder than a tomato, bit her lower lip, stared, then asked whether I had heard anything. I blinked with utter confusion and said I had no idea. What sound? My acting was so convincing she could not tell if I lied, and she turned away whispering it was good if I had not, and we should keep moving. I breathed a small sigh of relief, since I had been the one to suggest it. I had not considered how quiet and open this place was. Walking ahead, the blush would not fade. This time it was not a disguise. She was truly mortified, since how could a young girl be indifferent to that? Fortunately, another matter distracted her. Our travel speed massively increased. Walking beside or on the tracks was much faster than trudging in snowshoes, and far less exhausting. From a difficult struggle, we moved at normal walking pace. I told her, smiling, we might reach the camp office even earlier. Time passed. The sky grayed and light dimmed. Although nightfall was far off, the temperature dropped, and we, especially me, could already feel a biting chill. We fell silent, burying our heads. Looking up, I noticed the view had opened up. Sparse woods had disappeared. Occasional hills had turned into downward sloping basins. My eyes lit up at the familiar terrain. Near the camp office, the area around the tracks went flat and free of obstacles. Just as I was about to share the good news, a shrill wolf howl rang out. A chill went down my spine as 3 shadows scrambled up the left slope. 3 wolves, the leader very sturdy, the others slightly smaller. Size-wise, I wondered if they were the same species as the scrawny pair earlier. My expression changed and I cursed inwardly. I had forgotten something. In the game, animal perception was poor at distance, but once close they could smell or hear you even unseen. Walking on the tracks, we could not see below the slopes, so these wolves had been very close, caught our scent, and charged. We had long since discarded the long sticks to reduce load. Without a weapon, I did not hesitate. I pulled out the whistle and blew hard. When the whistle blew, it was not sharp but a long drawn-out howl. 2 sturdy figures leapt out like phantoms and solidified on landing. 2 tall Alaskan Malamutes, one gray and white, one mostly black, full of spirit, bright eyes. No confusion, they moved in front of us, shielding us, baring teeth, growling at the 3 charging wolves. Based on my survival show knowledge, 2 sled dogs plus 2 tall humans should at least make them hesitate. But these wolves inherited the game's senses. Extremely aggressive, charging on sight. At close range, gunshots and torches sometimes did not work. Same here. The sudden dogs made the wolves pause only a split second before all 3 lunged. The dogs lunged too. As they charged, we saw the sled dogs were significantly smaller than the wolves. And besides, sled dogs were for guarding and hauling, not combat. I judged immediately they would not last alone, and if they died, we were in serious trouble. I had to help. Someone was faster. She bent down, scooped 2 stones about half a fist, swung, and the stones flew with a whistling wind. One grazed the lower back of a gray wolf. The other struck another gray wolf right on the nose. The gray wolf struck on the nose, howled, eyes flashing murderous, and sprinted at her. The other lunged at me. The 2 sled dogs were pinned by the robust alpha. The size gap was apparent. The alpha knocked one sled dog down with a single pounce. The other bit just in time to keep the pinned one from being killed. Even together, they could barely hold against the alpha. After blowing the whistle, I spotted a wooden club not far away, over a meter long and much thicker than the earlier branch. I snatched it and swung at the wolf lunging toward her, since it was passing right in front of me. Although I did not exercise, I had returned to a youthful body. The club whistled and struck the wolf's front shoulder. The wolf, mid-sprint, lost balance, veered, slammed sideways into the snow, kicked up white mist. The move had exposed my back to the wolf lunging at me. A normal person's reaction would have been too slow, but I had a talent-enhancing neural reflexes. Twisting risked missing, facing it risked injury. The best was something else. Following my swing's momentum, I rolled forward. Not standard, but agile, clearing the position so the wolf snapped at thin air. She was even faster. She had intended to dodge, but had not expected me to intervene. Her eyes swept. She extended her right foot, hooked a branch, flicked it with her toe into her hand. She gripped the end, waist and hips twisting violently left, body unfurling like a compressed spring, the long stick shooting out like a flood dragon, thrusting straight at the wolf's head. The mid-level spear thrust was brilliant, striking the wolf square on the nose. The gray wolf, nose injured a second time, let out a sharp whimper as if electrocuted. Its head jerked, it stumbled into the snow, scrambled up, pawing at its face with front claws. Intermittent whimpering, large drops of blood falling, staining the white with crimson. Back on my feet, I cheered her on silently, telling her in my heart to keep fighting and not start acting. My biggest worry had been she would maintain her persona by deliberately acting weak. Fortunately, she was finally showing some real strength. Meeting my gaze, she blinked her large blue eyes, the Valkyrie expression switching instantly back to the flustered Gyaru, exclaiming she had actually hit it and crediting Spear Club activities to help friends meet recruitment quotas. I nodded vigorously, thinking whatever you say is right. Even if she said she went to the land of shadows and dreams to learn from Skethak, I would believe her. Just crush these wolves. She narrowed her eyes slightly and wondered if I seemed a bit perfunctory, but did not dwell, perhaps because the fight was on. She focused on the two wolves. I tightened my grip, squeezed my eyes shut, then rolled them around. Maybe the angle, sunlight off snow, stung my eyes. I felt as if a golden light had shimmered around my eyes when I had swung the club to save her, but it had vanished quickly. The two wolves back up were in sorry state. The one I hit clearly had a fracture, only 3 legs working, limping. The other had a bloody snout, blood still dripping, quite terrifying. The bloody-nosed wolf shook its head irritably, breaths short with growls. The two maintained a side-by-side stance, pacing toward us slowly, far more cautious after their injuries. While they assessed us, she assessed them. An idea formed. She told me her weapon was longer. She would stand slightly ahead and force them to show an opening, after which I should attack one with all my might. She now had confidence in me. First, my strength was decent. Second, my talent for neural reflexes was reliable, since my body could keep up with my mind. With coordination, taking down one wolf should not be an issue. After my affirmative grunt, she held the stick out front. With me on her left, we approached in a V formation. Her stick tip stayed pointed at the wolves' heads. My club held one-handed in the middle like a baseball bat. The limping wolf with fine eyes saw the situation clearly and stayed calm. But the bloody-nosed wolf had blood-clouded vision and intense pain. As our footsteps drew closer, it lost patience and made a faint pounce as a probe. Whether faint or real, as long as it moved, it was fine, exactly what she waited for. She advanced instead of retreating. With a flick, she performed a flourish and thrust the tip straight at the wolf's head. Also a feint, returning the favor. But this wolf's eyes were clouded, and it could not tell. It instinctively tilted its head to dodge. The movement collided directly into the limping wolf beside it. Normally being bumped by a fellow wolf was nothing, but this one was already injured. Sharp pain hit. It let out a mournful howl and stumbled several steps. I knew it was time. I strode forward, gripped the back of my staff with both hands, and swung from my waist in a sweeping thousand armies move. The staff slammed solidly into the wolf's ribs. A sickening crack. The wolf collapsed instantly, limbs twitching, pink foam from its mouth. Combat? Exhilarating, I thought. My strike had broken ribs and sharp fragments pierced its lungs. Pink foam meant internal bleeding. It would not live long. The bloody-eyed wolf finally saw the situation, its companion lying barely moving and the two humans unharmed. It did not hesitate long. It turned and ran toward the distant forest, abandoning the fight. The alpha in the distance, still locked with the sled dogs, also gave a low howl and left without lingering. She used her staff to support herself and let out a long breath, face showing lingering fear, asked whether we had won. I nodded, arm cramping slightly, confirmed a total victory. She let out a relieved breath that it had scared her to death, body swaying. The two sled dogs ran over. She crouched and rubbed their heads, called them good boys, thanked them. They wagged their tails, panting, very obedient. Minor injuries, nothing serious, and she wished aloud we could keep raising them forever. I had recovered some strength and walked toward the dying wolf, telling her there was no way around it since the wonder lasted only an hour. But novels suggested these wonders could be upgraded, and maybe these two could stay for good in the future. I crouched beside the wolf. In the game, an animal's basic harvest was 4 parts: fur, fresh meat, organs, fat. For wolves, eating carnivore meat carried parasite risk per the game, and realistically wolves were subject to biomagnification. The closer to the top of the food chain, the higher the toxin concentration. While not exactly at the top, they were carnivores, and the game warning confirmed it. We had not run out of food, so I skipped the meat. Other parts were usable, internal organs, dried, or key materials for bows or traps per the game. The wolf skin needed no explanation. Animal leather, perfect for warmth or a cushion. Since we had just finished fighting, I decided not to skin yet. I glanced at her, still playing with the dogs. I walked over and reached my hand, telling her she had to be tired. We should reach the camp office. She grabbed my hand and used my strength to stand, asking if it was close. I pointed north, another 10 meters and down the slope, and from the tracks she would already see the cabin. She puffed her cheeks at the wolves hiding at our destination to ambush us. Just too mean. I clapped to get the sled dog's attention and asked them to drag the wolf by its front paws to the camp office, since otherwise other animals might eat or ruin the carcass. She asked with worry in her eyes whether I planned to eat the wolf. Parasite risk in carnivores was high, she was well aware. Just as she thought how to advise me, I spoke my thoughts, that I wanted to skin it and utilize the organs. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief and dropped the subject. Without other animals, the last stretch was easy. After bypassing a small slope, she saw the camp office at a glance. A 2-story wooden cabin with thick snow on the roof, a flagpole with the Maple Leaf Country flag, a sign with the name, and rose hips clustered nearby. I peered at a small slope opposite the office, relatively gentle and unremarkable. She noticed my gaze, followed, found nothing, and poked me asking what. I said with regret that per game settings this slope should be a gathering place for Cappadocia owns gamecock, very worth hunting. Soup for boiling meat and feathers for thermal filling, but they had not respawned. Game settings had cleared wild birds of parasites, so no worry there. She tilted her head and asked if Cappadocia owns gamecock were like pheasants, picturing a few large clucking wild chickens. Since there were no Cappadocia owns gamecock into the camp office, I pulled her along and introduced more, telling her there were many types of Cappadocia owns gamecock, the genus alone with dozens, that the ones here were closer to pigeon-sized. She fluttered her eyes and remarked I moonlighted as a biologist besides tour guide, calling me too well-rounded. I coughed and told her to stop praising me. We arrived at the front porch. After closing distance, she was drawn by the huge lake further down the slope, looking almost boundless, surface intertwined with light blue and white, making her exclaim about a super huge lake. She faintly saw dark shadows. I explained those were ice fishing huts, one of the best long-term food choices. She asked whether Russell Coon knew how to fish, since she did not. Recalling my years of fishless trips, I sniffed and told her fishing was something you could do as long as you persevered. She vigorously nodded and said it seemed Russell Coon did not know how to fish either. After the fight, she had opened up and joked more, and I suspected she might soon share her real situation. Having the fishless trips matter pointed out was embarrassing, so I changed the subject. I told her not to underestimate this lake, that it was a treasure for beginners. The big circle of grass around was cattail, harvestable food. On the surface and snow around there should be deer. Her eyes lit up at deer, and she said if we caught one, it would solve meat needs for a long time. Easy to say, I thought. No weapon and stones alone could not hunt. Still, if she went all out with the 2 dogs, maybe we could. We stood at the door chatting until a cold wind made us shiver and laugh at how stupid we were standing in the cold. One thing before entering. I waved the sled dogs to drag the wolf around back, where the fuel box stood, a large wooden box. I lifted the lid, and my eyes brightened. The box contained around 10 pieces of coal and so much firewood, enough to burn for a long time. I shuffled them, stacked firewood on top of coal, cleared space, and threw the wolf inside. Let it warm my hands first, then figure out how to deal with it. Now we could enter. The camp office was clearly better maintained than Trapper's home, the door opening without that teeth-aching creak. Inside, the temperature was clearly better, even though the space was larger, though possibly we had just been frozen outside too long. The first floor was messy. The right corner had a single comfortable sofa. The ground scattered with small crates and drawers. Directly in front and slightly right was an L-shaped wooden counter with a radio she curiously fiddled with. Behind it, shelves and a workbench. In the middle, an iron stove with a chimney to the roof, thicker than the Trapper's stove but smaller overall. The left had joined counters, and at the corner a winding staircase. She remarked there felt like so many things since even without going upstairs she could see plenty of food, tools, and books. I told her to start the most interesting part of the survival game and collect the first floor. I rubbed the dog heads, took off my backpack, and began scavenging. I took the left side with the joined counters, since in the game most items there were food. First I tapped the laptops on the desk. Black screens, technically unusable due to magnetic fields but functional during aurora nights, when the screens lit up. A pity since they could have been a pastime, but I had to focus on supplies. Under the stairs I spotted 2 large burlap sacks. I untied the knots. Perfect. Over a dozen potatoes and carrots. The carrots were a bit wrinkled and some potatoes had sprouted, but no obvious rot. As an old northerner, I knew these too well. Sprouted parts of potatoes cut out with a knife were perfectly edible. In this ice world, leafy greens were unhopeable, and these were extremely precious vegetables. Beside the sacks lay a heavy greaseproof paper bag, opening sealed bright yellow with text printed. I picked it up to gauge about 2 or 3 kilograms. A flour bag, old mill flour, the most classic staple in the game. There were quite a few canned goods, 2 cans each of peaches and pork and beans, plus 2 cans of tomato soup, which would make a great seasoning rather than just heated. In the nooks, I also found 2 granola bars, a chocolate bar, a small bag of chips, 2 boxes of crispy saltine crackers, a small bag of beef jerky, and several cans of soda. Sandwiched between the counters, a tin container, a good hiding spot. I pulled out a cardboard box of herbal tea bags, only 5 but very fresh, a fragrant scent wafting out. A small tin of ground coffee, used once or twice, also fresh. At the top of the cabinet, I found a tin of rolled oats weighing nearly 1 kilogram. This stockpile was much more abundant than Trapper's home. I also found a small bottle of cooking oil and a glass jar with a bit of salt near the stove. She had made her way over and looked at the pile with surprise and delight, exclaiming about so much food. I asked how her haul went. Hers was significant too. 2 whetstones, a small hatchet for chopping wood, a small amount of lamp oil, common medicines like disinfectant and painkillers. She added a can opener, telling me I would not have to pry cans with a knife anymore. Setting that aside, she shook the item in her hand. A coil of line with a hook, the most important thing, she said. Although she had no fishing experience, she could tell this was a fishing line and hook, and she would be counting on my performance later. I smacked my lips, took the hook, placed it on the counter. Was it not just fishing? I thought this was not the real world. In the long dark, there was no such thing as coming home empty-handed, only a matter of how long. There was no rush for the second floor. After hours of snow, 3 wolves, and supply searching, both of us were famished. She tapped her chin and pondered, saying the stockpile was sufficient, and that since Cappadocia owns gamecock, rabbits, fishing, and cattails were ahead, we did not have to be stingy with food, and could have a slightly more lavish meal. I could not let her do all the work. Although my cooking might ruin the food, I could peel potatoes. She placed her hand on the flour bag, picked up a can and suggested we had canned food and staples, so maybe a delicious staple to go with the canned stew. I took a few potatoes and carrots and stood by the stove to peel. Well practiced, my mind wandered. I would eat my fill today, organize the second floor before resting, and tomorrow could consider heading onto Mysterious Lake to try ice fishing or catching a couple of rabbits. By the way, what was with that golden light in my vision during the fight? The only thing linked to mysterious events was the status panel. I subconsciously opened it and scanned. The familiar bronze badge, the talent currently awakening, still rotating colors. 5 colors. My eyes widened. There had been only 3 before sleep. When had it become 5? Wait, were there not exactly 5 sections on that badge? Could 5 colors mean the talent had finished awakening? I focused on the badge. The 5 sectors were completely filled. Deep blue, crimson, emerald green, and pinkish purple swirled around the edges. The center a brilliant rich gold. The system told me chosen by the 5 gods was exclusive, that I was watched by the god of humanity, the god of wisdom, the god of courage, the god of life, and the god of charm, and all my actions would receive their attention. My expression froze. Which 5 gods were these? Was this damned Warhammer crossing over? Getting hit by a car and dying? I did not panic. Being dragged into the wish corridor modeled after some god space? I still did not panic. Being thrown into the frozen, snow-covered maple leaf country? I kept my composure. But the moment I realized I was being watched by the Chaos 4 peddlers and the old sorcerer's cured meat, that was when a genuine flicker of panic ran through me. Once those old geezers fix their gaze on someone, dying becomes the hard part, and even after death, the soul and body get toyed with until they collapse. I muttered to myself, asking whether I could give the crappy exclusive talent back, give it up entirely if that was what it took. Mid-mutter, I noticed something different. Unlike my other talents, this exclusive badge had a small circled question mark in its top right corner, the kind of icon any gamer recognizes as detailed notes. I focused my attention on it, and a wall of content surfaced in my mind. The very first note made me exhale in relief, stating that the 5 great gods were positive-natured copies of the Warhammer Chaos 4 gods and the Emperor of Mankind, that they would not harm their owner and had no independent consciousness. With my heart settled, I read on at leisure. This talent did not hand me invincible combat power, it functioned more like an extra ability and item acquisition system, and as long as I performed actions aligned with the preferences of the 5 gods, I would draw their attention. The closer the alignment, the higher the attention, the more rewards I would receive. From ordinary supplies to high-quality supplies to talent skills and wonders of various levels. As for what counted as aligned behavior, I only had to recall what I was doing when I awakened the talent. The god of courage favoring combat. The god of humanity favoring people helping each other. That reminded me of something else. The shop. A god space like this should have a shop system, but I had not seen one. Perhaps it was the kind where players ran an entire shopping street and traded among themselves. Though even then there would still need to be a place for drops and production, or perhaps rewards came only after the world ended and the level was cleared. Either way, this exclusive talent was not bad, since combat, mutual help, finding ways to survive, and planning ahead were all essential in a survival world, and being paid extra for doing the necessary work was simply profitable. Earning the favor of 5 gods was not an overnight job, so I set it aside and returned to peeling potatoes. With 5 potatoes and 5 carrots stripped clean, I cut half into shreds and half into chunks with a freshly washed hunting knife. Hayasaka Ai had finished her own preparations by then, scrubbing the large bowls and a new frying pan with snow, then asking me to light a fire so she could boil water and rinse them several more times until they were truly clean. She mixed flour and oats in a 3-to-1 ratio, added my shredded vegetables and salt, and stirred it into a batter. 2 frying pans went to work, one heating oil for the vegetable chunks until the surface charred slightly before she added canned pork, lentils, and tomato soup as seasoning, the other waiting for her pancakes. She stirred slowly with a small spatula to keep the bottom from burning while she fried, and I cheered from the sidelines, useless for cooking, so I went out to gather dry firewood instead. I came back in with a handful of finger-thick twigs, shaking snow off my hair. She turned, paused at my movement, and asked if it was snowing. I set the sticks beside the sofa and told her it was only light snow, then added that we had moved fast enough, because traveling through it would have shredded our clothes. She patted her chest in relief, and I lifted the corner of my mouth in secret, since in the original work that gesture would still stir up some waves, but mainly because she was a padded person, and there were no waves now because, for safety, she had removed the cumbersome padding before entering the wish corridor. Not noticing my expression, she brought both pots to the counter and remarked that the place was nice, warm, and roomy and stocked, but there was no dining table, so we would have to eat standing. I handed her a pair of chopsticks I had whittled on the spot from decent branches found while collecting firewood, and she beamed at how thoughtful I was before picking up a piece of the shredded vegetable pancake. The crispy crust had an excellent texture, and because of the oats and 2 kinds of shredded vegetables, the inside lost that sticky pure flour quality, the oats lending graininess, the vegetables soft and sweet. I scooped a potato from the stew first, soft and fragrant, the soup rich with tomato and the salty pork. She told me, chopsticks at her lip, not to eat only the potatoes but to use a spoon for the broth. I followed her suggestion and tasted minced pork in the soup along with something chewy and shredded. And when I asked, she laughed and admitted she had shredded beef jerky in. I shoveled 2 more spoonfuls without a word, and her smile widened at the silent praise. We tore through the meal like a whirlwind, drank hot water, and I leaned on the counter announcing I was full while she said she would handle the dishes, and told me to rest. Stretched out and in excellent condition, I decided it was still early enough to deal with the wolf. She saw me pick up the hunting knife and stood to help, but I waved her off, since we only had 1 knife and there was little she could do, suggesting instead that she check the 2nd floor and organize the supplies up there. She nodded vigorously, side ponytail bobbing, and told me to come back inside the moment I felt cold. I put on my parka, threw on a cloak, and walked out with the knife. Processing the carcass indoors would leave a bloody stink, so it had to be done outside, and the 2 sled dogs followed me out, their summoning time near its end, sprinting a couple of laps around the camp office to confirm no other wolves were near before running back wagging and vanishing like bubbles. I went around to the fuel box, opened the lid, and pulled out the wolf. In under an hour, the body had frozen quite stiff. I dumped it on a snowdrift and stood there a moment, lost as to where to begin, my closest prior experience being a Lunar New Year back home when I helped hold down a pig while everyone else slaughtered it. Telling myself butchery was butchery, I squatted, measured a spot on the wolf with the tip of the knife, and pressed it into the abdomen. The instant the tip pierced through, the edge of my vision flickered with a light the same color as my interface. I called up the panel and saw the only bronze skill in my bar flashing, the system announcing it had detected a character skill, and the game skill Carcass Collection, and asking whether to record it. I raised an eyebrow. Carcass Collection was the game skill from the Long Dark for harvesting materials from animals, which meant my survival expert skill was not useless after all, that as long as it caught a skill from the game I could record it, though what record meant exactly remained to be seen. Rather than guess, I confirmed. The 0 of 5 in my survival expert description instantly changed to 3 of 5, and a new note unfurled, explaining that survival expert could detect skills or blueprints belonging to the current game world, the former requiring me to perform actions consistent with the skill, the latter requiring physical contact with all the raw materials and processing locations or witnessing the production, and once detected I could choose to load them. The 5 was the loading limit, with one skill costing 3 points and one blueprints costing 1, while loaded skills and blueprints, through long-term study, research, or repeated crafting, had a chance to be extracted into independent skills that no longer occupied the 5 points. I nodded, understanding now why the cap set at 5, perfectly tuned so I could hold one skill and 2 blueprints at a time, since 2 skills would cost 6. I smacked my lips with a little regret, because there were several skills I really wanted. First, the 3 combat techniques of rifle shooting, revolver shooting, and archery. Then resource skills like the Carcass Collection I had just claimed, and the ice fishing I had not encountered yet. Switching was allowed, swapping the loaded carcass collection out for ice fishing later if I wanted, but doing so would reset the proficiency of the unloaded skill and force me to start from scratch the next time. Even so, I was not anxious, since the survival expert effect was already strong, and even one slot was extremely useful. I rubbed my palms, set my hand on the knife, and activated carcass collection to taste a game skill firsthand. The next moment, my body felt taken over by a machine, peeling the wolf skin piece by piece with skillful method. Night deepened, and a light breeze rose, but the parka and cloak kept me functional, and I sensed I could interrupt the skill at any moment. About an hour of squatting in the cold passed before I shuddered and reclaimed my body, hands red with blood, and the wolf skin in my hand was pelted perfectly head to tail, a completeness that left me staring. Right there, I decided I would not switch skills. I would train carcass collection to completion, and make it an independent skill in this world, since I could still hunt with traps if I lacked weapon techniques. And ice fishing carried the ice prefix, who could say how much of its effect would survive in a normal location, while carcass collection was useful no matter where. Without it, I would have called myself skilled just to harvest the pelt from belly and back intact. I set the skin aside, shook out my hands, engaged my state, the chill seeping in but not yet decisive, and figured I had another 10 or 20 minutes left in me, so I activated carcass collection again. Practice made perfect, and with the first round behind me, the second came easier, and I slipped into that divine possession state and dismantled the internal organs quickly, despite cold, stiff hands. Focusing on the intestines, the skill lived up to its rule-based nature, the excrement inside the gut vanishing on extraction. What came out a complete clean intestine. The wolf meat was a different matter, since until my cooking skill maxed out there was a chance of parasites, so eating it was off the table, but the meat could still serve as trap material or fishing bait. The sky had fully darkened and the temperature had dropped further when the back door of the camp office banged open and Hayasaka Ai poked her head out in a beanie, calling me in and saying anything left could wait for tomorrow. I was a person who listened, so I obeyed, since even my heavy parka was nearing its limit. I stood, grabbed the wolf by its limbs, scanned around and spotted a withered tree not far off, and after 2 failed tosses, I hung the unprocessed carcass on a branch high enough that I could still climb to it, while the wolf could not. Hayasaka Ai's eyes widened at the pelt and she asked if I had really skinned it that way, genuinely surprised. I did not hide the truth, since I had already told her about my innate skills, so I explained briefly, and she looked envious because while her own skills were good, mine had clearly stronger applicability. Back inside, I tossed the pelt and the skill-cleaned organs into a corner, since in-game these items finish processing if left to air-dry indoors for a period. And from a realistic angle, untanned fur dried this way would turn into a stiff mat. But the skinning had used a game skill, so it might include tanning. And even if it did not, a stiff mat was fine because I had no plans to sew the pelt myself. My plan was to save enough materials, then use a workbench and raw stock to unlock and load a blueprint, experiencing that divine possession a second time, letting survival experts' automatic crafting produce the clothing. Hayasaka Ai, who had been straining to recall what she knew about leather tanning, nodded at the idea, agreeing it was for the best. Since her tailoring lagged behind her combat and cooking, she had no tanning knowledge, and even with the pelt ready, she could only modify the edges into a mat. So trusting my survival expert was wiser. As we headed for the second floor, I asked about her finds, eyes on the beanie now on her head, and she said the upstairs was full of good things, plenty of clothing, and then, remembering, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me along, saying there was one very important thing. The second floor opened with a corridor about 1.5 meters wide, 2 rows of waist-high cabinets along the sides stuffed with books, items that in the game existed only as fire starters but now held actual content, novels, essays, poetry collections. Resting a hand on the rail, I looked down for a panoramic view of the first floor. The main upstairs room past the corridor was about half the size of the floor below, dominated by 2 bunk beds for 4 sleeping spots. She put her hands on her hips, proud, declaring that the beds here were much cleaner than at the trapper's home, no strange smell, just a little dust she had already swept. I praised her a couple of times. A stove sat sandwiched between the beds, a nightstand and a desk in the corner, and the supplies she had scavenged were piled on top, clothing on the bed, the rest on the desk, including a few thick pants and thick shirts, a mid-length windbreaker, and under the table 2 pairs of boots, one heavy work pair processed at the toe, the other plain rubber. Before I could exclaim that we finally had shoes, she picked up an orange-covered book from the desk and shoved it into my hands, and the moment my palm touched it, the edge of my vision flickered again. The system reporting it had detected the in-game skill book Prey, Wilderness Cuisine Volume 1, asking whether I wished to consume the item to acquire the skill. I recognized the name. In the long dark, certain skills could be improved by studying books, and apparently the mechanic carried into the wish corridor too. She watched me with bright eyes and said other books did nothing, only this one triggered a prompt when she first picked it up. I waited and pushed it back to her. When she asked, I asked her what prompt she had seen and she read it off her panel, saying it merely detected a skill book and asked if she wanted to consume it to increase skill experience. I laughed, told her mine had offered to consume the book to acquire the skill outright, then crossed my arms and explained that since her cooking technique was already strong and mine was poor, the prompts came out different, and in my view she should keep it since her cooking was the stronger of the two. My reasoning was simple, that if I used the book I might only obtain something like a long dark cooking method at bronze, limited to in-game recipes and standard Western fare, while she had no cooking skill panel side yet but had real ability, and the book in her hands could produce a more applicable skill. It was not a critical skill anyway, so giving it to her cost me little, especially since I could always train carcass collection to completion and load a cooking skill into survival expert later. She teased me with a smile, saying my style of thinking was the legendary min-maxer, then gripped the book with a serious face and announced she would not stand on ceremony. I told her to use it to her heart's content, and the book dissolved as she closed her eyes, and a few seconds later she opened them again, gaze unfocused as she read her panel, and she told me in pleasant surprise that the new skill seemed pretty good. She described it for me, and just as I had guessed, the combination of skill book and her own talent had produced something more complete. The system named it Wilderness Gourmet at bronze, with flavor text saying that in a modern kitchen she would only be called an excellent chef. But in the wilderness, the vast majority of chefs would seem mere amateurs to her. That she could skillfully apply most natural ingredients gathered in the wild, fully unearth their flavor, and occasionally discover recipes with peculiar effects. The skill perfectly fit our situation, since beyond using wilderness ingredients, she might even cook food that conferred buffs, though the pity was that we had eaten ourselves too full today, leaving her no chance to show off, and she sighed that she would have to wait until morning and put 120% into breakfast. While I encouraged her, I got busy finding an iron drawer to use as a container, raking the dying embers and a piece of glowing coal from the first floor stove and transferring them to the upstairs one. She stood in front of one of the bunks and gestured, suggesting that since two of the beds were unusable, we could both take the lower bunks and pile the upper bedding onto the lower for a double layer with stronger warmth. I agreed while moving the bedding, though privately I thought it would be even better to push both bunks together and squeeze in for shared body heat. And when an inner voice accused me of lusting after Hayasaka Ai's body, I protested to myself that in a place this cold, every scrap of warmth was precious and everyone should huddle. Then I shook my head, dismissed the wild fantasies, and went back to hauling blankets. As we worked, we discussed tomorrow's plan, with her noting that the food reserves here looked sufficient but would only last about 5 days of consumption, so we had to find more, which reminded me of an online theory that the entire purpose of human existence in this kind of world was to obtain the 2,000 calories a body needed each day, and that was exactly the feeling I had now, that whether we searched houses, unlocked skills, or hunted, it all came down to food. Food was the primary issue, I admitted, sitting on the made bed and counting on my fingers, since in this game the main routes to food were searching, hunting, and gathering, 3 methods each with their pros and cons, and the area we were in happened to allow all 3 at once. My plan was to head out to the mysterious lake tomorrow, try a round of ice fishing, and gather some cattails, and if time allowed, continue to the far side of the lake, where a row of houses worth searching stood. She nodded and said she would listen to me, the way she always did when my plan had no major flaws, and we filled in details about tools and supplies to carry, what food to prepare, the general route. As we chatted, she started yawning, and yawning being contagious, my mouth followed hers wide open, and I called it for the night, telling her further discussion at this point was enough and we should rest. She wished me good night, still maintaining her gal persona, kicked off her shoes in a bold posture, slid into the thick quilt, waved a cute little hand at me and tucked it back under. Because the camp office was warmer and the bedding thicker, neither of us needed to keep watch. In my sleep, a line of text drifted slowly across my mind, telling me that I had spent the day uneventfully and failed to gain much attention from the 5 gods. The next morning, light came through the glass and fell on my face, and I opened my eyes slowly. The plan from the night before had worked. I could feel heat trapped beneath the quilt, and when I turned my head, the fire in the stove had long since gone out, leaving me to murmur that it was warm enough and I could expect a decent night's sleep from now on. In a good mood, I twisted a few times and rolled off the bed, since playing on a phone in bed at home was one thing, but lying in bed here just meant lying there doing nothing, which bored me to death. Rolling out, I noticed Hayasaka Ai's bed was empty. She had clearly risen earlier, and I muttered, asking where she could be, surely downstairs, and walked toward the stairs. I rest my hand on the railing at the corner of the first floor stairs, and tilt my head to watch Hayasaka Ai working at the iron stove. The room is warm enough that she is stripped down to a thick shirt and yesterday's cargo pants. And even in that rough wilderness outfit, she cannot hide her youthful air. I let out a slow breath, telling myself privately that watching her cook feels uncomfortably close to a newlywed wife making breakfast for her husband. Then I shut the fantasy down and keep walking. When I step onto the last stair, Hayasaka Ai turns and waves, asking with theatrical surprise whether I am already up, even though I know she clocked me the moment I shifted my weight on the landing. I nod and head for the multi-layered wooden shelf behind the counter, where she has already tidied all the gear and salvage from the camp office into neat rows. I pull down a small bottle of lamp oil and a few rags from the crate beside it, and she asks from the stove whether I am making something. I tell her I plan to build 2 torches, picking up a handful of wooden sticks I gathered by the door yesterday. I explain that we should make it back while it is still bright, but in case of something unexpected we need lighting, and since there was no storm lantern or flare to be found, I will have to manufacture our own. The moment my hand settles on the rags, sticks and oil together, the panel pings and tells me it has detected the game blueprint for a torch, and asks whether I want to record it. I confirm with satisfaction, since the torch is one of the simplest craftable items in the long dark and my survival skills should obviously pick it up. The construction is barely a craft at all, just an oil-soaked rag wrapped around the end of a stick, and any first-timer could replicate it after a single verbal walkthrough. Still, I trust a blueprint torch over a hand-rolled one, and under Hayasaka Ai's surprised gaze, my auto-crafting takes over, soaking the strips and binding them around 2 joined sticks into something that looks both sturdy and presentable. I finish both quickly, hefting one and giving it a few practice swings until the air whistles, satisfied that it could double as a melee weapon, and noting that with the head lit on fire, a quick poke to a wolf's nose would send any pack howling away. My efficient crafting puts envy back into Hayasaka Ai's eyes, and we settle into a simple breakfast of oatmeal, chocolate bars, and a can of sardines we pulled out of the second floor yesterday. Eating, I realize the food is decent but no better than yesterday, and for a moment I wonder whether the wilderness gourmet skill was earned for nothing, until I remember the description specifies natural ingredients. Factory oatmeal, plastic-wrapped chocolate, and canned sardines obviously fail that test, so the skill has nothing to grip. Even so, hot oatmeal in this frozen wilderness is more than enough, though I cannot help thinking the sardines fall far short of the date and salted black beans I remember from before. Hayasaka Ai finishes her bowl and notes a little helplessly that a frying pan can stir-fry but is hopeless for stews or porridge, and I tell her the game also features a larger cast iron pot perfect for stews and boiled water, and that the drop rate should actually be higher than the frying pan, so we will likely find one across the lake today. We split the salvage and add inner layers. I take the parka and the work boots, and Hayasaka Ai gets the rubber boots and the medium-length windbreaker. My outfit is thicker on paper and in fact heavier, while her windbreaker resists wind and traps heat well enough that with proper layers underneath, she will not feel much colder than me, and her lighter setup also lets her move more freely. The deciding factor is really that the rubber boots fit her feet better. We run through our load, a hunting knife, an axe, emergency rations, fish hooks and line, wolf meat and wolf liver for bait, and the torches strapped to our packs. Everything ready. Hayasaka Ai pats her cheeks at the door and announces we are off, and the warm cabin and sufficient short-term supply make the mood far lighter than yesterday morning's rush from the trapper's home to the camp office. Outside, Hayasaka Ai looks up at the slope where I told her a flock of Cappadocia owns gamecock might gather, but the place is still silent. She sighs that she had been looking forward to tasting some, then shakes the mood off and trots happily toward the wide lake surface. The new rubber boots insulate better and grip harder than her old leather shoes, and even bouncing across the ice she keeps her balance perfectly, half play and half careful adaptation to make sure her footwork will hold up in combat. Standing at the edge of Mysterious Lake, I look out across a surface far vaster than its in-game version, an undulating sheet of milky frosted glass, stretching toward a horizon where if I squint, I can just barely make out the dark dots of houses on the far shore, with a scatter of small compact ice fishing huts dotting the ice between. Hayasaka Ai breaks my reverie by calling out that sausages are growing in the snow, waving excitedly at dense rod-shaped plants along the shore with dark brown spike tips that do look almost exactly like sausages. I walk over smiling and explain that these are the cattails I mentioned, a classic game item, not high in calories but easy and abundant to harvest, and useful as tinder besides, though tinder is not a pressing concern given the stack of newspapers back at the camp office. Hayasaka Ai squats in front of them and pokes one curiously, asking which part is edible since the sausage-like tip clearly does not look like food. The question stumps me completely, because in the game you simply hold the mouse button on the plant, and it yields a cattail stalk without specifying which physical section that is. I admit as much, and she says cheerfully that knowing there is an edible part is enough, we can experiment, and asks if I can at least describe the shape. I tell her it is a long white strip resembling a smoother tender bamboo shoot, and she snaps her fingers and says we will simply dig up a whole one, break it apart, and find the matching piece. The logic is sound, so I drop the worry and tell her we can come back to the lakeshore for cattails whenever we have time. For now, we keep moving, and she pulls me along with big strides. We aim for the nearest ice fishing hut, only 100 meters or so off, and even on slick, uneven ice the walk is short. As the hut comes into sight, Hayasaka Ai's eyes narrow and her body freezes, and when I follow her pointed finger I see a few gray dots pacing back and forth in a loose ring 200 or 300 meters off, keeping measured distance from one another. Wolves. I admit I forgot to mention earlier that there are wolves on Mysterious Lake, and Hayasaka Ai teases that even I can be careless sometimes, then notes that at this range it should not be a problem. She does not say aloud what we both know, that yesterday we and the dogs handled 3 wolves uninjured, and dropped one outright, so a prepared engagement today would be even easier. I add that the ice fishing hut is right there as a fallback if it ever gets ugly, and turn away from the wolves, knowing that without a pack full of fresh meat in an upwind position they cannot pick us up. Inside, the hut matches the game exactly. A tiny room with a round heating stove, a side row of small cabinets, a wall-nailed cargo rack, and most importantly, a circular hole cut into the wooden floor in the corner. There is just enough space for one person to work comfortably, and with both of us inside it feels cramped. Hayasaka Ai spots a can of sardines on the cargo rack, and I dig through the boxes and cabinets, turning up another candy bar, an oat bar, 3 or 4 fishing lines, 2 fish hooks in a drawer, and tucked into the crevice between 2 cabinets, 4 revolver cartridges. After the sweep, Hayasaka Ai squats by the round hole and pokes the surface, which is long since refrozen, and asks what we do about it. I tell her the game lets you break the seal with a hunting knife, hatchet, pry bar, or hammer, and she eyes the sickle at her waist and my hatchet and doubts a knife will cut it, guessing it will take time even with the axe. I tell her we have to try, since fishing is non-negotiable as a long-term food source, and I unhook the hatchet and bring it down hard. Ice chips spray across the floor, and although the refrozen plug is on a different scale from the older lake ice around it, it still takes a stretch of chipping before I start to sweat. Then the axe swings into open water, almost slipping from my grip, and Hayasaka Ai's eyes light up at the splash. I pull my hand back streaming with icy water, and she is well prepared, producing a cloth from her pack so I can dry my hands first and then the hatchet. I work far more carefully on the axe than I did on my own hands, because the little axe is precious and rust would ruin everything. While I fuss over it, Hayasaka Ai threads wolf liver and wolf meat onto a hook, muttering to herself about whether meat will tempt fish, reasoning that since fish eat bugs, meat should at least register as food. After the axe is clean, I drag over a few wooden sticks piled in the corner, almost certainly fuel left by a previous occupant. While she baits her hook, I tie the loose end of the fishing line to a stick and knot it as tight as I can. The protagonist in the game just holds the line barehanded, but entrail-based line could open a wound down to bone if it slipped, so a crude rod is the safer call. I have fished before, but never through ice, and the 2 of us drop our hooks into a hole so small that casting is not even part of the question. After a few minutes of squatting, Hayasaka Ai feels the cold settling in. Nothing dangerous, but enough to chill her fingertips. And she comments that the stove makes obvious sense, that without it, and in a snowstorm, we would freeze. I agree that anyone planning to fish during a blizzard had better stockpile fuel first. The squatting also gets tiring, and since the floor is too cold to sit on bare, I make a note that we need small stools. The waiting drags too, and I add that next visit we should bring handicrafts or books, because the game's fast forward does not exist in reality. With 2 of us, it is at least bearable, since we can talk. Maybe it is the silence and the empty cold pressing in, but Hayasaka Ai is unusually willing to open up, talking about everything except the truly load-bearing secrets, the core ones like her being a personal attendant to Kaguya Shinomiya. She even hints at bits of her family background, which surprises me given we have known each other for only 2 days, and I start to wonder privately whether I have a drop of succubus blood in me, my invisible affinity practically whispering at her to look over here. I am no less open with her in return, and tell her that unlike her I did not enter through a granted wish, I was hit by a car and dragged in. She pities me, but I shrug it off and say I no longer dwell on it, since clearing 10 worlds is supposed to bring resurrection. She starts to promise that she too will work, and the wooden stick in her hand suddenly dips as if pulled, cutting her sentence short. She yanks upward, face bright with surprise, and reports that she has caught a fish. My eye twitches at the obvious beginner's protection period at work, because we use the same hooks, same bait, same hole, and somehow she got the first bite. I tell her not to rush and to bring it up steady since entrail line is far weaker than nylon or carbon in this cold, and could snap under a sharp tug. The accomplishments of the thousand-faced maid's skill holds her hands rock steady at a constant pull, and a long white shadow rises closer and closer until she flicks her wrist and lands a foot-long fish on the floor. I recognize it immediately as a lake whitefish, the most common freshwater catch in the long dark and the one I have caught the most in-game. Hayasaka Ai pokes the body curiously and drags it further from the hole so it cannot flop back in, asking whether lake whitefish counts as salmon. Then thinking aloud that if it does, it should be richest in fish oil in autumn and winter. Perfect timing for a taste, and she sketches a plan for a simple pan-seared fillet given our limited seasonings. I lick my lips, grateful to have a chef on hand since on my own the best I could manage would be primitive grilled or pan-fried fish. I am about to brag about my own rod when it twitches, and before I can even celebrate the line snaps clean in the middle, sending me lurching back nearly to the floor as the fish disappears. I draw a deep breath. A broken line is nothing rare for this game-grade gear, but with identical line, bait, and hook, the novice beside me has just landed a fish without trouble while mine failed, and the embarrassment is hard to push down. She giggles that she is the #1 fishing king of Mysterious Lake, then unhooks her catch, rebaits and drops back in, while I replace my line. With a confirmed catch on the board, both our energy jumps and the chill and boredom evaporate. We fish until nearly noon, pulling in 3 lake whitefish in total, and she crows that we can have a fish feast. I nod, satisfied since at least one of them came up on my line and I did not go home empty-handed. We process the fish on the spot, and although my cooking is mediocre, cleaning is one of my strengths, the scaling and gutting running together in one fluid motion until all 3 are stripped clean in moments. The guts and scales go straight back down the ice hole, both as an offering to the lake and a quick disposal of smells that would otherwise call in the wolves. While I work, Hayasaka Ai pokes her head out for a scan, and the wolves are still prowling at the same distance, showing no interest in closing. We agree to head back to the camp office first, because a morning of fishing has left us hungry and there is no reason to eat shelf-stable biscuits or oat bars now that we have fresh natural ingredients. She chats happily on the walk back about what a fortunate fishing spot we have so close to the cabin. Lunch is simple but excellent. The fish cut into large fillets salted to marinate for a dozen minutes, pan-seared and finished with rosehip. 2 fish leave us with greasy mouths and total satisfaction, and only with true natural ingredients does her wilderness gourmet skill finally shine. The taste so good that I am too busy stuffing my mouth to manage conversation. After our fill, we share a cup of our daily tea, tidy our gear and head out again, this time skipping the fishing hut and adjusting our line toward the houses on the far shore. At first the scenery carries us, but the long empty lake quickly turns dull, and we end up walking with hands tucked in and heads down. 2/3 across, with our legs growing heavy, a leaping shadow catches my attention. The far shore lays out as lakeside houses, sparse forest behind, then a sheer cliff rising nearly 100 meters, and we had been focused on the houses and the ice rather than the trees. Looking now, I pick out a herd of deer at the forest's edge, a strong buck with 2 long antlers, 2 smaller does, and 2 clearly smaller fawns. Hayasaka Ai notes them, and I touch my waist by reflex, regretting that we are carrying no ranged weapon. We move a few more steps toward the houses, and the deer, whose senses seem keener than the wolves, and whose ears we did nothing to evade, spot us immediately. The buck calls, and the whole herd takes off into the trees. I sigh at the lost shot, then refocus on the cabins. The cabins sit in 2 clusters a few dozen meters apart, each cluster holding only 3 or 4 houses, and we sweep the nearer cluster first. 2 houses have doors and windows boarded shut, and Hayasaka Ai tugs at the planks with her thin gloves, but they are nailed tight and do not budge. She asks if this happens in the game too, and I tell her yes, in-game you cannot enter boarded houses at all. Though in reality we might pry the planks off given the right tool. Without a crowbar on hand though, that has to wait. We push into one of the unsealed cabins, and a thick musty stench worse than the trapper's home rolls out and makes us both cough. I tell her we should keep doors and windows open while we search, or we will not last inside, and prop everything I can. The cabin is even smaller than the trapper's home, and with outside light pouring in we can take in the whole interior at a glance. A space that small does not hide much, just a few energy bars and strips of beef jerky and a flannel shirt, still in decent condition. We already have enough inner layers, but the shirt is light and can be cut down into mending cloth, so it goes into the pack. Working through both clusters, we collect 2 boxes of salted biscuits, 3 cans, and several worn pieces of clothing. The standout find is a blue toolbox, which in the game gates certain crafts and in reality holds standard wrenches, screwdrivers, and a small handful of nails, all extras. What truly excites me is a storm lantern on a desk in one of the houses, metal-bodied with a thick glass shade, the kind that holds a steady flame against cold wind once filled with oil. In a world where electricity only flickers on during the aurora nights, that lantern is the single most useful light source we could have hoped for. Hayasaka Ai, easily pleased, smiles and helps me clip the lantern to the buckle on my pack, calling it a bountiful harvest. I glance over my shoulder at the picture I now make, axe at the waist, lantern at the back, looking more and more like a genuine wilderness survival expert. She interrupts my self-admiration by announcing it is time for the wilderness survival master to head home, glancing at a sky that has turned orange-red, signaling evening, with the temperature already noticeably dropping. We have stripped every open-door house in both clusters, so there is no reason to linger. We kick the snow off our boots and set off, and the moment we step onto the frozen lake, a cold pinprick lands on the tip of my nose. I jerk my head up and realize that at some point a light snow has begun falling out of the sky. Snow. I freeze a moment, then look up and see a light gray cloud has drifted overhead while I wasn't watching. And to the northwest, a wall of iron gray mass is piling up, its edges dyed an eerie dark purple by the setting sun. Hayasaka Ai drops her Gyaru lilt entirely and asks in a grave voice whether those clouds are going to drift over us. And when they even gathered, since it looked perfectly clear a moment ago, the little cloud above us is already shaking out a few flakes, and if the whole northwestern bank slides over, a heavy blizzard is inevitable. As for when, I grumble inwardly that you do not ask such questions in the long dark. The weather is just that capricious. I tell her in a hurried tone that I don't know if they'll come, but if they do it will be massive, so we cannot keep moving this slowly and have to pick up the pace. We tighten the straps of our packs and step out onto the lake. At first, the snow is sparse and vertical, the flakes tiny, no wind at all, and what lands on our heads is blocked by our beanies, and what lands on our shoulders is shielded by our curtain capes. We are barely halfway across when the wind arrives ahead of the clouds, lifting a fine powder off the ice and whistling past us with a sharp edge. I glance back at Hayasaka and see her shivering against the sudden drop in temperature, though she is not yet exhausted. I grew up in the cold north and the current chill is still a far cry from the lowest cold I remember, but I am only proud of that for a moment. By the time we reach the ice fishing hut we used earlier, the cloud cover is total, the sun gone, the sky a uniform leaden gray that looks ready to collapse, and the flakes have grown thick enough to sting our faces. It is not only the cold that pins us, it is the collapsing visibility. Before, the silhouette of the camp office was clear from here, but now I can barely make out the lakeshore. I take down the storm lantern from my pack strap and light it, and the flickering orange glow drives the dark back enough that the path beneath our feet returns. And even though the flame cannot reach us through the thick glass, the warm light is enough to put a little strength back in our legs. I tell Hayasaka briefly to stay behind me, since neither of us has a scarf and the wind drives snow straight into our mouths whenever we speak, and I let her tuck in behind my back to conserve her strength. The last 100 meters are the hardest of the walk, and by the time my feet have gone numb, the lakeshore finally emerges inside the lantern's halo. I reach back, take her wrist, and pick up the pace, and we climb the gentle slope and tumble through the door of the camp office. Hayasaka shrugs off her pack and collapses limply onto the single sofa by the door, sighing that she really thought we were going to be buried by the blizzard. She licks her dry lips and adds weakly that catching delicious fish and finding such a great place to stay almost made her think this was some winter retirement game, but now she sees it as a survival game after all. I rub my face thinking, and she watches me, because by now she knows that when I zone out I have noticed something. I ask her whether the room feels colder than it did this morning, and she answers that it ought to be, with snow falling outside. I point out that it has only been snowing a little while and the drop is already noticeable, and if the blizzard runs all night, the wind and snow will get worse. She catches on at once, sits up, and finishes the thought that the temperature will only sink further by dark and we will have to keep a fire going all night. I agree. The weather here turns on a whim and turns dramatic when it does. And although we have a fair amount of coal and firewood in the bin, getting through tonight will burn a lot of fuel. And another blizzard after this one would put us in trouble. She sighs that it is the fuel problem on the heels of the food problem, one thing after another, but she pats her cheeks to rally herself and tells me with a vibrant smile that she believes the two of us will not be stumped by this. My heavy mood lifts. I stretch my wrists and head for the back door, saying I will go out first and bring back enough fuel for the night, and she jumps up from the sofa and tells me to wait. She is coming too. The blizzard outside has only gotten worse, and just fetching fuel from the back tank nearly turns me into a snowman. Hayasaka catches sight of my snow-white eyebrows as she helps me carry the load inside, and the corners of her mouth twitch before she laughs out loud, asking how I suddenly turned into an 80-year-old grandfather. I wipe my brow and answer that if they have gone snow-white, I have to be at the 100-year level at least, and she chuckles that I really do get serious about strange things. Very cute, while she lifts the wooden frame heaped with coal and firewood. I take it from her hand and head up to the second floor, and she watches me naturally take over the heavy labor, biting her lower lip while a flicker of something ambiguous crosses her eyes. Instead of following, she heads to the stove on the first floor, takes a frying pan and roots through the cabinet for ingredients, since neither of us has eaten dinner, and a cold night like this calls for heat in the stomach. From the stair turn, I see her at the cabinet and feel a quiet gratitude. This starting teammate has high combat power, a good brain, broad knowledge, plenty of useful skills, and a personality that is not pretentious. If I had been paired with someone who would lecture me about dieting on an icy night like this, terrified of one extra bite, I would frankly rather have survived alone. I get the fire going while she cooks something simple, and the wind outside grows more theatrical, but the orange light, the radiated heat, and the crackle of flame on wood are reassuring. She remembers a classmate who traveled in Nordic countries once and said that sitting by a fire watching snow outside was cozy, and she allows that she understands it now. She edges her feet toward the stove. Beside me is a stack of more than a dozen books I am leafing through one by one for anything useful, hoping for a maple leaf country version of Robinson Crusoe with a few wilderness tips. And I tell her there is nothing scenic to see from in here, that a lookout tower would be the place for that. She asks in surprise whether there are lookout towers, and I tell her yes, several, and one of them is nearby. The mysterious lake lookout tower is on my must-visit list, since it has a chance to spawn a skill book, and from any long-term view, a skill book that grants a whole new skill is among the most precious things in this world, so I am not going to miss it. We chat a while, then crawl into our blankets and fall asleep, and I make sure to add a few more lumps of coal so we don't wake frozen. The system reports that today was unremarkable and I failed to gain much attention from the five gods. The next morning, Hayasaka and I open our eyes almost together. She turns on her side, squints toward me, calls my name, and her own hoarse voice startles her. My throat is so dry it feels like it's smoking, and I cough and sit up, and the moment my back leaves the blanket, the chill bites. I look into the stove and see only a faint dark red glow with no real heat left. I say it was a mistake, swallow, and feel two dry muscles rub together. I roll out, fetch 2 cans of soda from the table, set one by her bedside, and drink half of mine in one pull before I can manage to explain that the stove burned too hot, and we should have slept with our feet toward it and our faces turned away. Hayasaka, feeling as if 2 chili peppers had been packed into her nose, rubs hard at it and takes a few sips of her own can, then comforts me cheerfully that we have the experience now and won't repeat the mistake. She rolls out and looks at the glass behind the stove, where a pale wash of sunlight is coming through. Not much warmth in it, but a piece of good news in itself. She squints through the heavy frost and says the snow must have stopped, since it is so clear out, and I drain the rest of my can and head down with her behind me. The moment we pull the door open, a cold wind floods in and shakes me awake, and Hayasaka tucks behind me, places her small hand on my back, and rises on tiptoe over my shoulder to look. A thick, fresh layer covers everything. No wind, no fresh snowfall, but the depth alone will make moving difficult. I try a few steps and the snow swallows my ankles, nearly pouring into the boot tops. She decides wisely against trying, and I conclude that today we should not range far, just nearby, when she cuts me off and grabs my shoulder, pointing hard toward an open snowy slope across from the camp office. I look and see nothing wrong at first, then notice the snow seem to shake, and realize the shapes there are not snow but a few white things, standing on the snow, occasionally twitching but mostly still. I say in surprise it is Cappadocia owns Gamecock. Their camouflage is genuinely strong, and without Hayasaka's eye we would have walked right past them. The Gamecocks, which had refused to show until now, are huddled and pushing against each other, almost packed tight. Hayasaka leans on the porch railing of the camp office, staring intently ahead, her tone bright with excitement, and asks whether we can try hunting them. I recall the game's methods and tell her these birds are very alert, no point trying to pounce. The usual approach is bows and arrows at range, or thrown stones. We have no bow, and as for throwing, I have very little confidence in my aim. But she catches my eye and says she could try, and she explains that her class once ran a dart throwing stall at the school festival. I raise an eyebrow. Whatever it is, a club or a festival, every skill she has ever learned ends up tied to that school of hers. Conan has Hawaii, and she has her school apparently. Either way, if she can hit a gamecock, it works for me. I crouch and rake through the snow near the camp office for stones, and she warms her fingers and wrists. She takes the slightly sharp-edged stone I hand her, weighs it, and feels a flicker of regret, since although the technique for throwing small objects is similar, she is best with handled tableware like throwing knives and forks. The reason being that one of her gyro friends once asked which combat skill best suits a maid, and someone said throwing tableware, and although the inspiration came from a fictional character like Sakuya Izuyoi, she tried it and found she had a real knack. So she practiced for a while. Bear stones are not knives, but for sniping a few gamecocks they will do. She declares that Phil Taylor is ready, sets her shoulder, twists her body, and flashes me a confident smile. Before I can even offer a word, she draws back, snaps her wrist, and 3 stones leave her hand at once. One grazes a gamecock's wing and sends it flapping away in fright. One strikes another gamecock on the side of the head and it drops without reacting. The third hits a bird at the base of its wing just as it was spreading them, not killing it but stunning and grounding it, while the rest of the flock scatters into the air. I have no time to marvel at 2 of 3 before I bolt out, sprint a dozen steps, and pin the struggling bird, then lift the other one whose head lolls dead to the side. I turn and find her standing with one hand on her hip and the other wiping her nose, looking proud, and I give her a thumbs up and say impressive. With her aim, I can already see the days of unlimited bird meat stretching ahead. She laughs it off as so-so. When I come back to the porch with both birds, she pokes the thick worm down and observes that the insulation feels strong. Which I know, since in the game, gamecock down makes warm clothing and better sleeping bags. The dissection falls to me, and my carcass collection skill processes both birds easily, leaving a small heap of down, 4 leg portions, and 2 large breast pieces. While she ponders what to make, she notices me sorting my boots and gloves, and asks whether I'm going out again. I nod. Food is enough for now, but nobody knows when the next blizzard will come, so while we can still move, I should bring in more fuel. She agrees, but tells me to warm my stomach first, and she briskly puts together a cup of sugary black tea and a quick breakfast for me, then walks out with me. Whatever pattern this snow followed, the fresh layer covers the old snow but somehow leaves the fallen branches in plain view, not buried at all. We wander the thin forest around the camp office and find a great many branches quickly. She remarks that fuel is no problem, but carrying it like this is strenuous, and we should think of a more convenient way. She sets her gathered sticks at her feet, stands on the higher ground and squints toward the distant shape of the camp office, doing the math in her head. Hauling sticks back 1 armload at a time, counting the gathering, would burn 20 minutes or even half an hour for a single trip, and even work to exhaustion she would not collect enough thin wood to heat 1 or 2 nights. I am squatting in front of a large fir branch shaped like the letter Y, the kind that in the game you chop with an axe for about 45 minutes to harvest several pieces of large firewood, except the game limits you to chopping and reality does not. I measure the branch and an idea forms. Back home in the North Winters, my older brother and I used to gather firewood from the wasteland outside the village and play with fire in the yard, so I do have some experience with this. I tell Hayasaka she is right. We need a way, and I already have an idea. I stand, hug the branch, and drag it down the slope to open ground where the route runs clean to the camp office, then pat the trunk and say we tie the small sticks to this. I switch on what passes for my superintelligence and we set to work. We gather every long branch we can find, making sure each is long enough that it will not slip from the V of the big Y branch, and can rest on the front and back. And every time we have a bundle as thick as a calf, we lash it onto the main branch with cloth strips. After about an hour, more than a dozen bundles are roped on, so heavy at the back that the front end of the Y has started to lift off the snow. Hayasaka is panting hard, sore from so much squatting, standing, and bending. She starts to ask whether we will gather them all and then figure out how to haul them, since with only the two of us, and I cut her off by drawing the whistle and giving it a small wave. She brightens and exclaims that we have the dogs. I do not summon the sled dogs immediately, since they will need a harness or line of some kind. They cannot exactly bite the trunk and drag it home. We agree she will go back to the camp office and find usable cloth or rope, and I will look around for anything else worth collecting. From the high spot, I scan the trees and notice a large, sturdy oak nearby stripped bare of leaves. I clap my hands at myself for forgetting, since in the long dark there is a chance to dig acorns out of the snow under an oak, a novel food that might at least replenish trace elements. With Hayasaka not back for a while yet, I walk to the base of the oak, crouch, and start cutting into the ground with my axe, clearing the fresh layer and breaking through the compacted snow beneath, and soon I am turning up acorns one by one. I am starting to understand the joy of a bear. This digging is genuinely pleasant, especially since every scoop yields more, as if there is no bottom. I wipe each acorn and drop it into the pack on my back, and before long the pack is heavy enough to pull up my shoulders. I decide to myself that this is enough for now. The acorns are right here and they will not run away, and I straighten up. Just then a low growl, as if squeezed up through a throat, sounds behind me, followed by splashing snow as something rushes closer. Without thinking, I lunge forward and roll, and since I never fastened the pack, the acorns scatter everywhere across the snow. I come up covered in white in a disheveled crouch and turn to see a wolf has pounced onto the patch of snow I just vacated. The wolf is heavy and fierce-eyed, and even though I tend to face blind with animals, I recognize this one as the leader of the three that attacked us the day before yesterday. I tell it sourly that it really is holding a grudge, even knowing it cannot understand me, and the wolf takes my muttering as a challenge and bares its fangs more savagely, pacing a slow circle around me. When I raise my arms to look defensive, it suddenly accelerates and breaks from the side to pounce. If the wish corridor were like the god space where every physical trait had a number, my strength, agility, and constitution would be ordinary at best, just passing, but my reaction time, propped up by my skills, is in another category. As the wolf launches, my pupils tighten, my heart hammers, and the heat that rises in me is not panic but rage. I had let it go. I remind myself that the day before yesterday we had 2 dogs with us and held the advantage, and we did not chase it down, and still it will not let it go. The thought circles and circles, and anger flushes my skin, sharpens my focus, and seems to put extra strength into my grip, until the wooden axe handle creaks under my fingers. I duck the pounce, twist, swing, and the axe head slams into the wolf's hind leg. It howls, crashes into the snow, rolls, and barely stands again. Before it can recover, I push off both legs, charge at it at the fastest pace I can summon, and bring the axe straight down on its snout. A plain, unadorned, powerful hack, and it whines once and collapses. I poke it with the axe, no reaction, and confirming it is dead, I straighten up and notice my legs and hands shaking a little. I wonder to myself what that was, whether my adrenaline just kicked in. I have no fighting experience and cannot account for the clean, efficient sequence I just performed, and at this moment my chest is pounding and my calves are starting to cramp. Before I can fully settle, Hayasaka's voice carries from the distance, calling for me, and she trots over in small running steps. Seeing that I have turned around uninjured, she slows her frantic pace, then catches her breath, and exclaims that I took down a wolf entirely on my own, that it is amazing. Unable to feel proud in front of the much more combat-capable Hayasaka, I downplay it modestly as a small matter, not worth mentioning. She circles me a few times, and only after confirming I have not a scratch does she look elsewhere. She notes that another wolf means another wolf pelt, which puts us at 2 pelts now, and then asks about the scatter on the snow, whether I found acorns. I tell her yes, dug from under that oak, plenty more underneath. She says this place really is a treasure trove and she wants to dig some too, and since acquiring the wilderness gourmet skill, she has only grown more interested in natural ingredients. So she crouches down beside me and starts digging away enthusiastically. While Hayasaka I squats under an oak tree digging for acorns, I bring my axe to the side of a felled trunk and clear the small branches off it, shaping the front end into a slanted curl like a sled. I tie the 2 ropes Hayasaka dug out to the back connection point of the Y-shaped trunk, then blow the whistle and summon 2 sled dogs. Hayasaka may not rate her tailoring highly, but stitching 2 scrap cloth harnesses is nothing for her, and the dogs stand patient and tail wagging while I fit them and thread the ropes tight. By the time the rigging is done, she walks over brushing snow from her hands, pouting in that small, unhappy way that makes me ask what is wrong. She weighs my backpack against hers, and complains that I came back with so many intact acorns while she dug forever for a handful of chewed scraps. I am stunned for a beat, then understand. I tell her I was probably just lucky and stumbled into a patch the bears had missed, because acorns are dense in calories and trace elements, beloved by bears as much as by people, and deer pick them too. Hayasaka digging for ages and finding only gnawed leavings is the normal outcome, while my half backpack haul is the strange one. She narrows her eyes, nods that she had forgotten about the bears, and lets it go, saying a few kilograms between them still counts as a real harvest. I add that this is not the only oak in the area, that if even half this much comes out from under every tree it will be more than enough, and she echoes that I am right, squatting beside me to help check the harnesses. She eyes the bundles of firewood roped to the trunk and estimates close to 50 kilograms, and I confirm her count of the small branch bundles still leaves out the big trunk underneath, which is heavier than all of them combined. She asks whether 2 dogs can really pull all of that, and I rub a head and tell her not to underestimate them, because pulling a person is easy work for these dogs, and pulling wood is easier still, especially since the camp office is close. I point to it in the distance and give the order, and the pair step off together, slow at first, then trotting, tails wagging loose and relaxed. I tug my hat brim, tighten the rope tied to the dead wolf at my waist, and stride after them, telling Hayasaka that the real question is not whether they can pull it, but whether we can keep up. By the time we catch the dogs at the front of the camp office, they have already been waiting a little while. I lift the lid of the fuel box and pitch the firewood bundles in as fast as I can, and Hayasaka, watching the box fill to half full from over 20 bundles, smiles and says it should burn a long time. I am less cheerful because experience tells me thin sticks burn fast and cannot match large blocks or coal. Coal means going to the mine, and large logs mean I trail off, remembering the logging camps in the long dark, the places where workers used to fell large trees, strip the bark and saw the trunks to standard size of roughly 30 centimeters diameter and 2 to 3 meters long. In the game, those piles are background texture, uninteractable, but Hayasaka and I are not players, and what exists here exists in reality, so we can touch them. A few of those dragged back would burn for a very long time, and the nearest logging camp is close to the camp office. But this is only an idea for now, because a trunk that size could weigh near 80 or even 100 kilograms, and even with the dogs the shape is awkward to drag without a saw or a sled. I keep the plan to myself and we continue collecting. The dogs cooperate beautifully. We find more Y-shaped branches for them to drag back inside the hour they last, and after they vanish we drag in the few smaller bundles we have found in the surrounding area. Hayasaka leans against the back wall of the camp office panting and tells me her stamina is completely spent, and I feel sweat under my own thick clothes and realize the danger, pulling her quickly inside so the cold wind cannot catch a stamp and turn it into a chill. We each have a cup of black tea, and Hayasaka opens cans for lunch because her hands are shaking too hard to manage anything more complex. The good news is the fuel box is full and 5 or 6 large branches are stacked beside it, easily a week of burning. The price is that both of us are wrung out, and though it is barely past noon, neither of us can move. I had planned to rest a bit and then go to the ice fishing hut, but I let that go. We spend the rest of the afternoon limp on the bed without moving, and it is only by evening that Hayasaka recovers enough strength to make dinner. I am not idle either, going outside to process the wolf carcass, harvesting the pelt and entrails again, and pitching the leftover meat up into a nearby tree, muttering that it would be wonderful if some wonder existed to strip parasites from raw meat automatically. Dinner is pan-fried fish fillets with flatbread and tastes excellent. While chewing, I tally our reserves. All the fish on hand is gone. We ate lazy canned food at noon, and only 3 cans of peaches, 1 of tomato soup and 1 of pork and beans remain. With my hoarder instincts, less than a week's food makes me anxious, since I only feel safe with a shelf packed full. Hayasaka has been thinking about this too, since she handles the cooking. And over dinner we set tomorrow, fishing in the morning, cattails in the afternoon. The blizzard has stopped, though the air is still not as warm as it was a few nights ago, so I light a fire to take the chill from the room and we go to sleep. Since the chosen by 5 gods talent awoke, the last 2 nights as I closed my eyes a line had drifted into my mind, telling me I had an unremarkable day and failed to gain much attention from the 5 gods. Tonight is different. A hazy red light blooms in the dark behind my eyelids, and the text tells me I did well today, that the god of courage casts a glance at me, and that I have received a small reward. The timing is perfect, dropped on me just as I am about to fall, and even noticing the change I cannot fight sleep open and slip under. In the morning sunlight clears my head in an instant, and I sit up sharply and pull the interface open, wanting to see the notification again. Hayasaka, still lingering in bed because yesterday wiped her out, is startled and stares at me wondering whether I have finally gone cabin crazy, though I have seemed fine all week, and there has been no warning. I tell her it is nothing, just that my exclusive talent has shown some activity. I had mentioned the talent to her during our first ice fishing trip and acted as her sounding board, because her own exclusive talent has yet to wake, even though the pentagram emblem on her panel is already full of thick black mist, and could fully awaken any day. She rolls over and climbs up, eyes lighting at the word reward, asking whether I got anything. I read back with the talent reports. My actions yesterday earned the god of courage a glance, and a small physical reward has already been issued. I look around and see nothing unfamiliar and start to wonder if my prize has been swindled, when Hayasaka points to a small stool by the iron stove and asks whether it is that. On the stool sits a black stone fitted on a wooden base. I recognize it at once as a whetstone, the same kind we already found in the camp office. My mouth twitches. The god of courage, the positive face of corn, and his gift is a whetstone. Seeing my face fall, Hayasaka comforts me that it is at least free, and I sigh and let the irritation go because she is right and because the reward was probably small for the same reason the deed was. A single wolf killed alone. A bear would surely earn more, but I have no decent weapon and going to find a bear would simply be feeding it. Hayasaka offers that since it is a gift from a so-called god, the whetstone might have hidden effects, perhaps unusual durability, and I nod and head downstairs to bring up the axe. The blade has been through small branches, ice holes, and acorn digging the last 2 days and needs a touch-up, so it is the perfect test. I press the edge to the stone and run it once, and the axe in my hand becomes so smooth it almost slips out. And when I pull back to stroke it a second time, I see a cold flash across the blade, already sharpened in one swipe. Hayasaka exclaims that one swipe saves a lot of time, and that this is a good reward after all. I rub the edge with a fingertip and the sharpness is obvious, and I suspect the whetstone is not only fast but adds a sharpness bonus to whatever it touches. I press my palms together and bow, apologizing to the god of courage for calling him stingy a moment ago, and promising that if killing a single wolf earns gear like this, I will personally wipe out every wolf in the area. After yesterday's duel, I am confident that with my reflex talent, a wolf alone is no real threat. Hayasaka catches my eager look, narrows her eyes, and warns me very seriously that useful as these gifts are, I am to act within my limits, and never do anything stupid chasing rewards. She keeps watching me through breakfast, and meeting that skeptical gaze, I scratch my hair and tell her not to worry, that I will not do anything suicidal. My eyes had lingered on the whetstone too long for her comfort. She huffs that she will hold me to it and that she will keep her eye on me, and I raise my hands in surrender. A nice item first thing in the morning lifts both our moods, and after some joking around we continue with the agreed plan. Fishing in the morning and cattails in the afternoon. We prepare better this time, each packing a small stool and a small blanket for our legs, and bringing along 2 books. In the long dark, ice fishing can be hands-free with something called a tip-up, similar to a rabbit snare. I think that is what it is called. My memory of it is hazy because I rarely use them in the game, and when I tried combining materials in the camp office to craft a few, I could not unlock the recipe. Since I could not unlock it, manual fishing it is, and I comfort myself that fishing is a hobby of mine anyway, and the time at the hole is enjoyable. The haul confirms it, since after snapping 2 lines we take 5 lake whitefish and a smallmouth bass, the latter of fish I first met playing Stardew Valley. I spend half an hour roughly processing everything, then we collect a few more cattails by the lake on the way back, intending to study them carefully indoors. I peel a whole cattail top to bottom and finally pull free the same harvestable shoot the game gives. I set the snowy white tender shoots in a clean pan and spread my hands, asking Hayasaka to confirm. She activates the power of Wilderness Gourmet, gives me a thumbs up, and tells me the shoots are perfectly edible and that she already knows how to cook them. For the afternoon meal, she begins with her old method of pan-fried fish fillets, which we never tire of, then tosses the shoots into the same pan to flash fry in the residual heat and plates them beside the fish. She tells me with sparkling eyes to try, and I pick one up without ceremony and pop it in. The shoot has taken on a faint amber from the pan, and the first taste is the aroma of fried fish, then a light fresh sweetness of an aquatic plant, the inside tender and juicy with a texture like water chestnut. I praise it and stuff a second piece in, and Hayasaka, satisfied, giggles and picks up her own chopsticks. We had only pulled a few cattails on a whim, so the plate empties in 2 passes. Hayasaka remarks casually that we can collect these often and now have another way to feed ourselves, but that line raises an unease in me. Fishing went well today, yet the wear on the lines was severe, and roughly half our fishing line is now gone. If the rate of harvest and line loss holds, we can pull maybe 10 more fish, which in this cold and at this level of exertion is only about 2 days of eating and would still need pairing with something else. Fishing line can be made from dried gut, but with only 2 sets of innards drying, we will not produce many lines. While at the hut, I had scanned the lake and noted that the little wolves there were missing, while the deer still wander the far side near a distant house, and if we could kill a deer, we would get gut, edible meat, and hide. We have no ranged weapons, though. On a clear, dry road, I could see Hayasaka, our little superhero, sprinting with a throwing spear and bringing a deer down. But in this mixed, fresh, and packed snow, she could not catch a deer if she ran her legs off. As for me, setting aside the cheat tier reflexes, I am only slightly stronger than her in stamina and not faster. So chasing is out. Hayasaka finishes her meal and sees me deep in thought and leaves me alone, tidying her own tableware and starting on the acorns we hauled in. Wilderness Gourmet is too comprehensive, since her pre-existing skill would have let her bake with acorn flour, but starting from raw acorns is beyond her usual range, and the talent feeds her the traditional water soak to leach the tannic acid, and even offers acorn coffee or acorn pancakes as outcomes. I blink out of my thoughts, glance at her working the acorns, and stand up to put my coat back on, intending to gather more cattails while there is light. An afternoon of walking pays off well. At first I picked the cattails closest to the camp office, but I remember that even rabbits do not graze around their own burrows, and these cattails cannot regrow in this season. So if I clean out the near patch, a future food crisis will leave nothing on the doorstep. With stamina still good, I walk further along the lake and finally return with a full haul just as the sky is going dark. Because the day was uneventful. Just as I expected, the bedtime line is the same as the previous two, telling me today was uneventful and I did not gain the attention of the chosen by 5 gods. In the morning, we shoulder packs almost identical to yesterday's and head back to the ice fishing hut. Hayasaka muses that time flies, that we have been in this world 5 days already and today is the 6th, that getting through tomorrow will mark a full week. A trace of relief shows on her small face as she points out that a 20th of our survival window is already behind us, and that staying easy like this would be wonderful. Unfortunately, Hayasaka turns out to be a bit of a jinx today. By my estimate, the remaining hooks and lines should have lasted 2 more days for at least 10 fish, but the day refuses to cooperate. We sit down inside the hut, and all we hear is the sound of lines snapping. Within an hour, every line on hand is gone, and our harvest is 2 lake whitefish. Hayasaka, who can usually keep smiling through anything, breaks a little and asks why the lines are so brittle today, and I rest my arms on my knees and sigh because there is no real answer to line snapping. Fishing is over for now. She presses her hands on her thighs and turns to me, her face showing a flicker of confusion, asking what we do next. I rub my fingers, knowing the gut is not yet dry, and decide we should look for more supplies. I tell her we should check the other ice fishing huts, my mind moving quickly, because hooks and lines are usually easiest to find in the huts, and there are several scattered across the lake, only one of which we have searched. The other huts may still hold usable line and hooks, which only treats the symptom rather than the cause, but is enough to buy us 2 more days of fishing. Hayasaka claps lightly and praises my thinking, asking why she did not think of it, and tells me to get going. We drop the caught fish back at the camp office and continue across the lake. Hayasaka watches the much quieter ice and murmurs that our luck is not all bad. The lines may have broken, but the wolves have gone too, so at least the walk across is safe. I feel the opposite. After tasting the first reward from the chosen by 5 gods, I only want the next. And I have noticed how high the overall value of wolves runs. Individually, they are not strong. They drop pelts and innards on death, and they carry a chance of bonus rewards, which is about as ideal a prey as one could ask for. We walk along the lake for a while when Hayasaka spots a narrow frozen river extending off to the side and asks where the path leads. I glance at it and answer casually that it ends at Carter Dam, another well-known spot on this map, and that we would pass several smaller places along the way, like a circular snowy clearing where there are rabbits, and then I trail off mid-sentence. A few steps up the river and a turn on shore would put us at that round clearing, where rabbits live and deer occasionally pass through. But the animals are not what I am thinking about. I am thinking about the hunting blind on that clearing, the small wooden shelter where one crouches concealed and peeks out over the top, and the considerable chance such blinds carry of hunting-related supplies. Poor luck still nets bullets or food. Good luck can turn up a bow or a gun. And based on my own memory and the 6 save files I just rolled, I think bows and guns do not actually spawn at this blind in the game, which I am misremembering. Hayasaka pokes my arm with a finger and asks why I stopped, and I hurry to explain what I just thought of. Her eyes light and she insists we absolutely must go there if there is a chance at a bow or a gun. Still, things go one at a time, and since we have already begun working the huts on the lake, we agree to finish all of them first, take whatever supplies we find, then loop past the blind on the way back. Hayasaka muses that even just a bow would be enough for some hunting, then second guesses herself, saying a bow could handle wolves and deer, but bears or moose would still be impossible. She turns the question on me with a probing look, and I think for a moment and answer that theoretically it is still possible, because the protagonist in the game can take a moose with a bow, and bow hunting moose is a mature sport in real Maple Leaf country, though I have no real confidence in myself since my own bow knowledge is limited to knocking and pulling. Remembering I never told her, I add that there are bears on Mysterious Lake too, and her guard rises at the news. I tell her there is no need to panic, that a bear is much larger than a wolf, and very conspicuous against all this white, so we will spot one from a long way off and can simply avoid it in advance, the same way we have already avoided wolves. Her mood settles. By now we have reached the very corner of Mysterious Lake, a U-shaped indentation with one more ice fishing hut tucked near the edge, our last target for the trip. I look around to orient myself and point to the innermost part of the U, asking whether she can see the cave there. She follows my finger and nods. I tell her that is the bear cave, that theoretically it spawns a bear, but the bear does not stay near the cave, and since there is no sign of one now, it must have left. As I describe the bear cave, I duck into the last hut, and Hayasaka follows close behind, and neither of us notices that the moment we are inside, a dark shadow steps slowly out from the depths of the bear cave. Hayasaka Ai whispers in delight as she pries another flattened can of sardines out of the gap between the wall and the cabinet. For some reason, this corner ice fishing hut is far better stocked than the others, yielding fish hooks, fishing line, 2 cans of sardines, a small cache of snacks, and even a book wedged behind the cabinet, though the book sadly is not a skill book. Because the haul is generous, we sweep the place twice over, spending easily double the time we gave any other hut. Once nothing has been overlooked, we shed our backpacks and sort the supplies into neat piles. With everything organized, I head for the door, telling her on the way out that there should be some burdock along this lakeshore. And since I have never eaten this stuff, and it is easy to gather, we may as well collect a bit. As I turn my head toward the lakeshore, the corner of my eye catches the bulk of the hut, an oddly large shadow taking up most of my vision. Something is wrong though, because the shadow seems to be rising and falling gently, and I wonder if the glare off the ice is playing tricks on me. I turn fully, and a huge crouching shape resolves into a pair of small black bean eyes locked on mine. The behemoth snorts, a puff of white steam blowing from its nostrils, and a thread of sticky saliva even lands on my pant leg. My eyelid twitches as I confirm, against all hope, that the thing in front of me is a black bear. Hayasaka Ai emerges right behind me, her body going rigid, but she keeps perfect discipline, holding still and studying it instead of screaming. Maybe no one has come through here for a long time, or maybe the bear has simply never seen a human, because the heavy North American beast just sizes us up rather than charging. She whispers to me that we should back away slowly since it does not look set on attacking. Then, remembering her Gyaru persona, adds that she has picked up a little black bear knowledge from popular science shows. Privately, she thinks she could probably hold her own against this thing and at worst escape, but she has no taste for needless risk, and she is mostly worried I will get reckless and go after it for talent rewards. She is overestimating my appetite for trouble, because I value my life, and while I could take a lone wolf, a bear with bare hands is out of the question, a bow at minimum. I murmur my agreement. The bear shuffles forward and plants its left paw across the doorway, cutting off any retreat back into the hut, so all that is left is slow withdrawal. I reach out at an easy pace, take Hayasaka Ai's wrist, draw her behind me, and begin walking backward in tiny, careful steps. Bear Bro might be full, or just groggy, because he only grunts and snorts and shows no urge to lunge. We open about 5 paces of distance, and neither of us turns to bolt, because a bear is far faster than a person, and a sudden run would only invite the chase. Just as we are starting to breathe, a wolf howl rolls in from the distance. Howls have been background noise for days, day or night, asleep or awake, and we have grown numb to them, but this one is catastrophic timing. The bear huffs sharply, lurches upright, leans forward, and unleashes a roar that leaves my ears ringing. Combat mode engaged, it drops to all fours and charges. I yank the dog whistle from around my neck and blow it hard, and 2 sled dogs materialize from the void to plant themselves between us and the bear, only to be flicked aside the moment they brace. One knocked flying on impact and the other slapped to the ice mid-bite. The bear is on us before we can turn. Reading Hayasaka Ai as the smaller target, it angles toward her. My pupils contract and my super brain kicks in, sketching a plan, that my reaction is quick enough to shove her clear and then nimbly skip back myself. An idea bordering on the same idealism as sliding under a Siberian tiger's belly to gut it. But I trust my reflexes. She is already about to dodge when my palm catches her backpack and skids her 2 paces sideways. I pull my hand back, brace my right foot to pivot away, and the ice creaks under me. The fresh dusting of snow on top of the lake ice is murderously slick, and in Hayasaka Ai's wide-eyed view my foot shoots out from under me, and I go down on my back. The bear, having swiped at empty air where Hayasaka Ai's head had been, swings its head toward me as I sprawl. I landed squarely on my tailbone but managed to keep my head from cracking the ice, sparing me what would surely have been the most embarrassing death in the history of the Wish Corridor. The pain in my coccyx is sharp, but I have no time to nurse it, because the bear's paw is already coming down. The same slick ice that dropped me now denies me any traction for a roll, so I sling the backpack off my shoulder and shove it up in front of me as a shield. The paw crashes down on the pack, the thick book and the side-strapped torch absorbing most of the force, the torch snapping in half, and I am hurled backward across the ice for several meters with a grunt squeezed out of my throat. Nothing feels broken, but my arm is going to bruise badly. From Hayasaka Ai's vantage, I just took a bear paw head-on and let out a cry of pain, which to her means I am gravely hurt. The thought that I had shoved her clear only to end up like this triggers a rage she cannot contain. She draws the hunting knife from her pack, its edge gleaming cold from the god of courage's whetstone, and decides that since this bear has clearly classified us as prey, she will take the initiative herself. She weighs the knife, narrowing her eyes, combat calculations running fast, my slip reminding her not to trust her balance blindly on this ice. The bear gives her no thinking time, opening its jaws and lunging in to finish me. Both sled dogs scramble back upright, unsteady but loyal, one clamping the bear's hind leg while the other tries to drive into its belly. With the bear distracted, Hayasaka Ai bends low and slides forward, using the slickness against the bear, gliding right alongside its head and driving the hunting knife at its eye. The bear's body shift sends the blade glancing off the bone just above the eye instead, shallow but ferocious, blood instantly curtaining its vision on that side. I have basically recovered by then, so I claw the snapped half of the torch out with my good hand and jam it hard onto the bear's nose, with blood blinding one eye and its snout slammed. The bear flinches back. I drag a match out, strike it one-handed against the wood, and press it to the oil-soaked rag at the torch's broken end, and flame leaps up and licks across the bear's nose. Half-blind, nose-seared, dogs gnawing at its rear, the bear finally abandons the hunt, lashing both sled dogs into bursting bubbles, and charging off towards its bear den with a strange wailing roar. Hayasaka Ai exhales, the fight draining out of her eyes, and although she trusts her throwing arm, the bear is turned away now, and she would only stick the knife in its rump for a minor wound, while losing her only blade, which is not worth it. She tosses it aside and drops into a crouch beside me, asking with no trace of the Gyaru act left, how badly I am hurt. I answer that I think I am alright, pressing my forearm, feeling the sharp ache but able to make a fist and straighten the arm, probably just soft tissue bruising with the bone intact. Her legs go weak with relief, and she breathes thank goodness. Inside I am a little annoyed because my plan had been to save her with effortless cool and then make an elegant escape, and instead I shoved her out and nearly got myself killed in the doing. Looking at her face though, my mood reverses, because she is acting as if I were the young lady Kaguya who had been swatted by the bear, and I cannot help wondering whether this whole catastrophe has just spiked her affection. I let the thought drift, since my arm still hurts and I am in no mood for any romance subplot. She tells me to take it slow and drapes my arm over her shoulder, and as we rise she glances at my profile and quietly decides, looking at me up close, that she should sit down properly and tell me the truth about herself. She does not want to keep lying to me anymore. The walk back is far slower than the walk out. My arm is the loud injury, but my tailbone is still throbbing too, so I cannot run, jump, or even keep a normal pace, just shuffle. Mercifully, the wolf pups whose howl set the bear off only howl and never appear, which is fortunate, because in our shape we could not have handled them, although Hayasaka Ai privately thinks if any had come she would have slaughtered them in pure rage. Even at a shuffle I cannot keep going indefinitely, so we stop at a few ice fishing huts along the route to rest and ease our bodies. She has given me her entire daily ration of 2 cups of hot black tea, drinking lukewarm soda water herself, and grouses that we really need something like a thermos so we are not stuck boiling water at every stop, or sipping cold drinks. I tell her there are thermoses in the game, but they were added late. I never use them much and I cannot remember the specific spawn locations. She suggests it would be better if I just pulled one in through my talent rewards. A sharp whistle of wind picks up while we chat. She steps to the door, sees the gloomy gray clouds gathering again, and helps me up with a serious look, telling me snow is coming and we have to push on. We hurry, but flakes are already drifting down by the time we reach the camp office. She gets me up to the 2nd floor and lying on my stomach on the bed, then trips back out to the fuel bin to haul in extra firewood, so we will not have to wait out in the snow at night if the temperature drops. While she works, I prop myself up, peel off the jacket and roll my sleeve to check the damage. The forearm is a wide patch of purple, alarming to look at even with the backpack and torch absorbing most of the blow, and with no real medicine I have to just bear it. I make a quiet plan to forget about hunting until this heals, prioritizing air drying the animal innards into fishing line and trap snares, sticking to the safer ways of getting rabbits and fish for now. Hayasaka Ai comes up the stairs with a frying pan and ingredients, planning flatbread and pan-fried chicken. She kneels by the bed and asks if it is that bad. Brows knit hard, none of her usual cheerful air left, and I tell her not to look so grim. It is only bruising, nothing broken. She bites her lip and does not answer. Her hand reaches toward the bruise, hesitates as if afraid to hurt me, and pulls back halfway. She turns to the stove, lights the fire a touch clumsily, sets the pan on, pours oil, and rotates the pan slowly. I start to call her name to lighten the mood, but she cuts me off, takes a deep breath, and tells me there is something she wants to say.